just wanted to introduce you guys to Brian. Brian is the creator of the Covert Access Team. Uh, it's a company that offers physical pen testing assessments, but also trainings that are really cool. And he's also a cybersecurity specialist. And like from the more notable things about Brian, he was the head of for Nordic region for cybersecurity. Did I get that right?
I started off with applied mathematics. So if anybody thinks that they can't get into cyber or physical security, like, yeah, I was literally doing pen and paper math when I started this and programming things in Haskell, which, sucks the soul out of you. If anybody's ever done, functional programming languages. So I started doing that for the US military, and then I got into doing kind of the more traditional cyber end of things through various research projects with the same entity. And then I started working with some guys who were very, very good at the physical end of things. I was the cyber end of their physical stuff. That kind of gave me an introduction to the two. And then for the last 17, 18 years, I've been running all over the world doing either physical security or cyber security. And these days it's a lot of physical security. But it's fun. It's a fun job. And as previously mentioned, every once in a while I jump into a real job where I'm working for corporate until I can't stand corporate anymore, and then I go back into my own company and where it feels safe. So.
But can you tell me about the Covert Access Team and the trainings offered and like how this thing started to
Yeah, so I've been on and off since I'm an American. I run all over the world. Obviously, you need visas. So I tend to jump into companies to mostly get visas whenever I want to stay in some place for an extended period of time. But on the back end, I just run my own company. I've done it for quite a while, whether it's freelancing or whatever. But Covert Access Team, it's kind of the culmination of everything I've done. So we run cybersecurity pen testing, we run physical pen testing and auditing, and then we run courses. And we've got, I think, about half a dozen courses that we're running right now. I'd say that it's 50-50 public and private. So there's some public listings that we run, and then there's private entities, whether it's a company or a government or whoever wants some type of training that I can provide, we'll go do that. And this ranges from everything from social engineering and elicitation to some type of breaching and black teaming or physical pen testing or whatever, to what type of cyber skills should you be able to do and are useful on physical pen tests, because obviously breaking into the building is great, but then you actually have to do something. So I mean, and then there's auditing classes. We just offer anything that might be in some way useful to the physical pen testing space is usually what I do. And then I get hired a lot to do kind of private one-on-one trainings for companies or organizations that have like a really niche thing they want to learn usually. So it's like if a company or organization says, hey, we're going to run a pen test, and this is the type of fence and type of thing and type of lock and type of this that we're going to be engaging in, and this is what we would like to do once we get into the system, teach us all the things we would need to do on exactly that setup. And so I've had to do that from time to time too, which is fun. It's a really interesting putting something together like that. But yeah, so it's a fun job. It's fun running around the world and breaking into banks and government offices and all this kind of stuff. So if anybody's interested, I encourage you to go into that realm, especially if you're in Europe with the introduction of CER, especially so this year-ish. There's NIS2, there's CER, and there's DORA. But CER especially has a weird Brussels vague language to it that basically says, if you're in the critical infrastructure space, which means power, water, trains, roads, medical, if you're in anything to do with critical infrastructure or in its periphery, you have to increase your physical security testing to this and kind of what you do to the same level that you are currently doing for cyber. Which means that, I mean, when you think about, okay, well, how many critical infrastructure things are in any given European country within the EU? There's tons, right? And then you realize that starting this year, or I guess starting next year, you have to test run physical pen tests, run audits, run this, run that, on all of them. So if you're interested, I mean, now's a good time to get into it. Just letting you know.
So yeah, I have like a lineup of questions that
Sure, please.
go around that subject. So, what is physical penetration testing, and how does it differ from traditional digital pen testing? Like,
Right.
type.
So, okay. Yeah. So, okay. So if I was to tell, if I was to say, all right, let's run a network pen test, right? Well, actually, I'll back up for a second. Let's say you're running a no, I'll stay there. Let's say you're running a network pen test on an internal network for some company. Generally speaking, what you're really doing is you're just looking, how can I get onto the network, or if I'm already on the network, and how can I get the domain controller, right? How do I take over the domain? That's, most entities are running Windows. Most Windows are running Active Directory. Active Directory is basically controlled by the domain controller. So how do I get to there? How do I take, full control of it? A physical pen test, in a lot of ways, is kind of similar. What you're doing is the client will come to you and say, we want you to physically assess our building, our location, our complex, whatever. And we want you to try and get to some crown jewel. Maybe the crown jewel is the data center, maybe the crown jewel is the server room or the board of directors room, or if they're just trying to prove a point, maybe it's like the CFO's desk, whatever. Your job is to find a route from the outside of the building to that location, ideally in as many ways as possible. So when I say that, I mean, yeah, okay, fine. You could tailgate in through the building and you could just walk right up and then do a thing. And if that succeeds, great, good for you. But with a physical pen test, like anything else, you want to find as many vulnerabilities as possible in the time that you're allotted. So in my experience, there's really three reasons why an entity will have a physical pen test. One, they're doing their due diligence. This is an organization who already has a high level of physical security. They just want to make sure that their teams are using the tools that they have correctly, right? It doesn't matter if you have the best cameras and locks and sensors and all that kind of stuff. If you treat it like a car alarm, that when these things go off, you're just kind of like, you just ignore it, right? Nothing happens. So a physical pen test in those situations, it's good to just verify, yeah, okay, you're using it in the way that it should be used. Another one is basically the entity has way too much money and they're trying to blow it at the end of the year. Okay, well, if we don't spend this money, then we're not going to get the same amount of money next year, so we have to just spend the money. Usually that's government, right? The government whole, if you don't spend it, you lose it. And a lot of times the third is kind of, we don't really know what a physical pen test is, and we just want to try it. Although I will say this, the other entity, I guess there's four, the other one that I see a lot, and this is a common one that's kind of sad, but it's somebody on the board of directors or a facility manager or a CISO or somebody like this who sees that they have a lot of vulnerabilities and they don't have the budget to actually fix them. So you'll get brought in to scare the board by showing them just how vulnerable they are to physical breach. And then hopefully that will scare the board into giving you, a higher budget. That last scenario is usually the one where they really, really, really don't want you to get caught. So all the other ones are usually just like, look, try to break in and try to get to the server room or the archive room or something in as many ways as you possibly can, and you can be loud and dumb at the end, just for giggles, that's fine. But that last one where they're trying to legitimately scare the board into a bigger budget, they really don't want you to get caught because they really want to wow the board by saying, oh yeah, by the way, here's like everything was compromised, you never heard about it, no alarms went off, scary stuff, so give us more money.
Yeah, great story. I have a question in the chat. So
Sure.
actually a few of them, but let's start from the top. Hey Brian, what would you say are the best European countries that offer a good market for physical pen testers?
Okay. So there's a lot. There's a lot of entities that you will have that do good for physical pen testing. I cannot. Let me back up. I will say where I've had the most success, because I can't generalize to others, but I can say where I've had a lot of success. I've had a lot of success in the Nordic region. Everything from Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, like all of these countries, I've had a lot of success. These tend to be the richer parts of Europe, And as a result, companies in these locations tend to have more or less money to burn. Not a lot, but they do tend to have more money to spend on things that other countries wouldn't. I have had a lot of success with these locations. I've also had a lot of success in Germany and some in France. So I would say more in Germany than in France. And then oddly, a lot in Poland. But it really just kind of comes down to, so okay, let me back up for a second. I would argue I have done at least one physical pen test, I think, in every single European country. So there are countries where I have done 40 or 50, and then there are countries where I've done like 2. But I would say that I've done one in at least, I'm pretty sure, every single European country. I'd have to go back and check all of them, but I've done it in a lot. What it really come down to is your connections and your ability to sell it. So for example, in Denmark, when I'm trying to sell a physical pen test in Denmark, I will try to build up relationships with people, within companies or things like that, because it's a very friendly, very kind of jovial society. When I'm in Germany and I'm trying to sell a physical pen test in Germany, I will push this is within compliance and regulations with CER, NIS2, et cetera. Right? So knowing your audience and knowing these things helps you a lot. I have colleagues of mine who they've had, way more pen tests in Germany than I have, physical pen tests, mostly because they know more people there, they have a bigger network, and they know how to make those sales. I really believe that you can make these sales and you can make a career out of this anywhere. A lot of this will come down to 2 factors. Well, 3. 1, how good are you at it? You have to be good. Okay, you can't be that guy who just has a flipper and he's going to try and tailgate in. You have to go beyond that. 2, know your audience. Know who you're trying to make the sale to. So like if I was for the very first time trying to make a sale in Poland, I would grab somebody like Dorota and say, hey, tell me Polish customs. Tell me, you're from Poland. Tell me what types of things work on Polish people. What types of things would work, social mannerisms, that sort of thing. And lastly, it's really just going to come down to your network. If you have a good network within that country or those places or those organizations, they will typically help you to make more sales. But I will stand by the fact that I think that you can make a good career in physical pen testing in any European country. But I've had more success in the Nordic regions, some of the Eastern European countries, Lithuania, Poland. I've been down to Italy, I've been down to Greece, I've been down to these countries, but I think I've only done 4 in Greece in the last 4 years. So it's like, yeah, I've done some, but not nearly as many as I've done in some of the other countries. I don't know. I hope that answered your question. If not, please ask a follow-up.
Yeah, but also like from my perspective, that's like a very cool answer and like interesting to know. And another question is, do you maybe in your scope need to drop something inside the company, like a fake USB or on a specific desk or fake or real rogue device, then get out?
Okay, so every scope will be different. Just like every cyber pen test, there will be some overlap. But if I was to say, for anybody, I assume that a lot of people on this call are probably in the offensive cybersecurity space. If I was to tell you guys, okay, you're going to run 15 web app pen tests. Well, every web app is going to be different, right? But there are obviously going to be some overlaps, right? You're still going to try cross-site scripting attacks. You're still going to try various injection style attacks. There's some things you're always going to try and look for, but every web app will be different. Everyone will have vulnerabilities. Everyone will have weird stuff going on. So when you're doing the physical pen test, there's a lot of things that'll be common, right? What is the company and the client contact most concerned about? Usually what you're going to get to the server room, get to the archive room, get to the CEO or somebody on the board of directors desk. That's usually where the conversation starts. A lot of this is going to be predicated on why did they hire you in the first place? If they hired you to scare the board of directors, then oftentimes they will say, look, under no circumstance do we want you to get caught, and we want you to go to this one very, very high security place, and we want you to put a business card on the CEO or the CFO's desk. If they say, we just want you to test our overall security posture, and this is what we are mostly concerned about, this is where you should be pushing your expertise, because this is where you say, look, do a little bit of OSINT, do a little bit of recon, talk to your client contact, and ask them this, and ask them a variation of this question. In your opinion, as the client contact, what is the one or two things that if you lost control of it would completely destroy your company? Sometimes that's going to be if your server room was compromised because you don't have a backup. Sometimes that's going to be a weird thing like loss of reputation, right? It may, like, ask the client contact, in your opinion, if you lost control of anything, what would destroy your company? Like, what would be the thing that brings it down entirely? And when they give you that answer, that's what you should go for. I'll give you an example. I was doing a furniture store, and no, it was not IKEA. I was doing a furniture warehouse kind of store in Europe, and I had originally scoped this to know that this was like a corporate office with a factory attached to it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try and get into the corporate offices. I'm going to try and get into the factory. I'm gonna, whatever. But as I was talking to the client contact, I said, hey, walk me through this. Like, what, in your opinion, would be the worst catastrophic thing that could happen to you? And he brought up something that I would never have thought of. And he said, inside the warehouse, if you manage to get into this building of the warehouse where all the pallets and all the resources are kept, we have this really, really big, like 3-story robot. And basically, it just runs back and forth, automated, and just grabs stuff. And then it just brings it, puts it on conveyor belts and shit. And he says, and basically, that robot is custom built, and it would take, if it was destroyed, it would take about 2 years to make it again. And they said, and in that time, the entire factory is built around that robot. We don't really know if we could keep up with production because we'd have to have guys with ladders running up to all the stuff, getting all the stuff and putting it on. So it's like, that robot is critical. Definitely not something I would have ever considered. But having known that, one of the things that I now added onto the test was I want to try and get to the control room for that robot. Like inside the factory floor, I want to get to where the person controlling that robot is, and I want to see if I can like basically leave a business card there, or have a picture of Bash Bunny standing in front of the whatever. So it's stuff like that. It will change, but kind of going to like the Bash Bunnies or the dropped USB sticks and other stuff. Yeah, there's a good chance you're going to try a whole bunch of stuff, and you absolutely can. And when it comes to dropping USB sticks, nobody on this call would probably be stupid enough to walk in a parking lot, see a USB stick and go, oh, that's amazing. Walk it and plug it directly into their laptop, or especially not like walk it into a secured facility and plug it into something they shouldn't. But I will tell you from lots of experience, there are ways that you can entice that to have a really high success rate. And it all comes down to knowing your audience.
And who is the prettiest girl in the company?
Yep. I think I mentioned this one,
Yeah.
but yes. So to everybody on this call, I apologize if this offends you. I'm not intending on it, but in our experience, there are a few things that work very well. And actually, Dorota, since you know it, if you want to mention it, you're welcome to. Something that you can do to a USB stick to have a pretty high success rate of getting somebody to plug it in.
Yeah, but actually that was a fun story for me. I really like that one. So if you know who is the prettiest girl in the company, you can name the USB stick with her name and, for example, say pictures or diary. And for
Yep.
sure there will be someone that finds that USB stick that likes her actually and would like to gain more information about her or like see those nice pictures of her. And
Yep.
yeah, and then that would work better than, for example, I know a nameless USB drive. And then, okay, so I have a next question from the chat.
Sure.
Uh, what's your best marketing strategy to actually get the company to order a physical pen test? Some still just see it as fun and not as a need.
Okay. So one of the first things that I recommend doing is don't focus on the pen test. So there's two components. My best strategy for actually making a sale is, first off, ideally, the gold standard is to build rapport with the client contact before you ever try to make a sale. So if you want like the full-on social engineer way of making a sale, Don't ask to make a sale. Get that foot in the door by building rapport with that client contact who you know you're going to make a sale to. Offer them something for nothing and then wait about a week or two and then come back and ask for the sale. That to me is, that, let me say it this way. If you were sitting at a cafe and somebody walked up to you and said, hey, would you mind, doing me a favor? Well, that's really weird. You don't know this person. They're like, you're very off put by this. This is a very, invasive kind of thing. But if that person happened to be sitting next to you and said, looks over at your table and you've got some nice coffee drink or something, and they look over to you and say, I was actually just going to get a coffee. What is that? It looks really good. You tell them, oh, it's this, something mocha frappuccino thing that I have. And you said, is it any good? And then you call the waiter over and you say, I would like one of those. And you know what? If you want one, because let me get you a refill on yours, just for showing me what this was, right? If you do something like that and you strike up a conversation with them and you have a coffee and you never bring up a sale and you exchange business cards and you build up that rapport and then weeks go by and then you bring up the sale, that's the gold standard. That's the full-on social engineering route of doing something. And you might think like, oh, it's impossible to do this because you're never going to see the CEO or the CFO of some company at a cafe, and that's true. But where you will see them is conferences, networking events. That's where you'll see them a lot. But all of that aside, if you're just making a cold call or you're reaching out to a client that you already have, what I usually recommend is this. Don't focus on trying to make the pen test sale. Give them options. Because you're right, a lot of people don't really understand, like, why would I ever want to do a physical pen test? So you need to kind of, one, and kind of educate them on the risks of it. And two, you need to give them options. So what's going to happen a lot of times is, a physical pen test, roughly speaking, is going to run 2 to 4 people on your team for about 2 weeks. That's roughly speaking, kind of the duration and team size that you're going to run. And that's really expensive, right? It's an expensive thing to do. So a lot of companies can't afford to do it. And what will often happen is your client will say, well, I could afford to bring one guy on for 2 days. Could you break into my building in 2 days, just one person? And you should absolutely say no. But what you can do is you can say, well, look, here's the advantages and disadvantages of running a pen test. But most companies have never run a pen test before. So what I would recommend you do is you start off by telling them, about insider threats and the risk that insider threats are. And some of those risks are, everybody on this call probably understands why you should not make every single person on your network an admin, right? You probably shouldn't give every single person from the CEO to Bob the intern the network administrative levels of control over everything. Right? That's pretty dumb. And further, you definitely shouldn't make the entire network a flat network where everybody can go to everything. But in a lot of ways, that's what you've done with your physical layout of the building. Everybody from the intern to the CEO probably has full access to 99% of the building. That means where they print the ID cards or where they make new ones, maybe the server room, maybe the archive room, the CEO's desk. Even the interns, like the 19-year-old kid, could walk up there and do anything he wanted out of either negligence or stupidity, or he was bribed, or whatever. So you can talk to them and say, look, the threats to you are not just from some guy in a hoodie and a ski mask breaking in the middle of the night. It's also about, any of your staff being tricked into doing something. We just talked about USB dropping, right? Well, I mean, a 19-year-old intern who finds a USB that he's encouraged to go inside and plug into his work laptop, if he happens to be an IT admin or something, it's like, yeah, then that could be catastrophic. Further, another question is, this is something that I often ask. I say, okay, we're in this big office, you have a cleaning staff, I guarantee it, because you're not making your employees sweep up after yourselves. Could you tell me the names of 4 of your cleaning crew? Because it's usually crews of 5 or 6. And whoever I'm talking to will be like, well, no, I don't know who they are. I was like, right. And I'm willing to bet that they don't know who you are. But they have full control and full access to everything in your office. Like, what would you, in your opinion, what would be the biggest catastrophic thing to happen to you? And usually what they'll say is ransomware. They'll usually say, well, if ransomware is injected into the server, we would be catastrophically screwed, or we would be down for weeks or months. And you're like, okay. So what is stopping the cleaning crew or the intern who have full access to all of this, especially the cleaning crew who's here unsupervised at night, from walking that in and plugging it in? And usually what they'll say is, well, it's never happened. And they're like, yeah, it hasn't happened, but basically you're hoping it never will. You're telling me that it would be a catastrophe if it happened. And you're not willing to even investigate like if it's secure because you just don't think it's probable. And it's like if you took that exact same approach to actual ransomware from the internet, I don't think you would ever do that. I don't think you would ever say, well, it's probably not going to happen. We don't need firewalls or antivirus or anything else because, I mean, come on, who's going to target us, right? So bring that up, like walk them through the threats, walk them through all this. Then what I often do, since most companies have never run a pen test, is I say, you probably don't need a pen test. A pen test is a little too much. What I would recommend is an audit. Because the difference of a pen test and an audit is a pen test is going to run 2 weeks, 4 to 6 guys. An audit is going to run 1 week, typically, with 1 to 2 guys. And the reason why it's shrunk is because you're not doing any recon. You're going into the building completely overtly and you're walking through the facility top to bottom and you're looking for all the stupid mistakes that you could or would have taken advantage of during a pen test and writing all of them down. And then you're writing them all down in order. You know, you're saying like, okay, well, this needs to be fixed and this needs to be fixed. Needs to be fixed, but it's okay if you put it off. By doing that, it's much more cost savings to the client and it's something usually they can afford. And also you can say, well, and at the same time, it's not going to disrupt anything, you know, like a pen test might, and blah, blah, blah. So what I recommend is you don't focus on selling the pen test. Focus on giving your client options. If I came up to each one of you and I said, do you want ice cream, but it has to be vanilla? Well, okay, maybe 50% of you would say, sure. But if I came up to you and I said, would you like some ice cream? And I've got 6 different flavors you could pick from. I'm going to have way more success at getting people to go, yeah, sure, I'll take some ice cream. So when you come to them, make sure you offer stuff. You know, don't just say, well, all I've got is a physical pen test. That's all I've got. You know, I can try to massage it a little bit on the dates and the time, but that's all we got. Like, give them options.
Oh, that's with the ice cream example. That's really interesting because I actually like vanilla, but if you put it like that it has to be, I feel like I don't want the ice cream at all. So it's interesting how the brain works.
Sure.
So I have another question from the chat and great answer. By the way,
Thanks.
do you usually inform the local police that you do a physical pen test just in case some employee calls police without giving you the chance to show your get out of the jail letter?
I never have to, I've never once in 18 years had to call the law enforcement beforehand. What I have had to do before is I have had to call a country before I've ever gone to it and verify that certain tools are allowed. So some tools in certain countries, especially in Europe, can have rules and laws that you might not think of. Like, oh, if you go to Poland, you can't bring lockpicks. You know, you might not think about that, and then you get off the plane, and the TSA are like, what's these? So, you know, I've done that before. I've verified like what is and isn't allowed before I've shown up, but I've never called the local police and said, I'll be running a pen test on these dates. Usually what I do is this. I make sure that when I'm running an engagement, I have 2 client contacts. The reason I have 2, by the way, is in case one of them becomes unavailable, I have a backup. Because there's nothing worse than being like 3 in the morning, both your client contact is asleep, you get caught, and you're trying to explain to the police or something or security, like, no, I'm supposed to be here. Here's a letter. And they're like, we don't believe you because the client contact isn't, you know, answering his phone. So make sure you have 2 client contacts as a backup and make sure, I know this like really kills the James Bond vibe, but ideally tell the client contact when you're going to be on site so that he can be available. You know, that way, like, you know, you don't do something where you're like, oh, I'm going to go break into this facility at 3 in the morning. The client doesn't know that you're going to do that. They're totally asleep. They've turned their phone on vibrate or something, and if something goes wrong, you call them and nobody answers. Well, you might be going to jail that night. So yeah, that's usually how I avoid that.
Yeah, yeah, we don't want to go to jail. And okay, so another question, where is the line? What do you do and what is too much during physical pen test? Is that also determined in the rules of engagement with the
Yes.
client, or is it just common sense?
Well, both. So the rules of engagement will outline generalities. You can't use destruction. You can't rob somebody. You can't like bring a toy gun and like pretend to rob an employee and get them to open up the vault or the server room, right? There's going to be some generalities that you can't do. But there's also, you're often going to come across things where you just have to use common sense. So, for example, okay, if let's say you've broken into a building, and let's say that inside the rules of engagement, it says you are not allowed to steal any property. Okay, so you can't steal anything, and you can't go into and you can't, like, whatever. I'll just leave it at that. You can't steal any private property. But let's say that you're inside the building and you've bypassed some level of access and you're walking through where the employees work and you see a woman's purse that's sitting on the floor. It's open, and inside the purse you see what you think is her work ID. Can you reach into her purse, pull out her personal belongings, and then try to clone that card? And unfortunately for me, the answer is always no. Because for me, that's kind of more common sense. Because here's a question that I've asked all of my students. Let's suppose for a minute that you go to, in this exact case, let's say it's not in a woman's purse. Let's say it's just on the desk. Let's say that instead of using access control systems, they're using physical keys. And you see a bunch of keys, from somebody's key ring on their desk. And you're like, oh, I've got a cloning kit. I've got an impression kit in my pocket. I'm just going to, clone them all just to be sure, right? Because I don't know which one is the actual office key. So I'll just clone them all. Well, if you do that, you have also cloned like her car and her house and other things. And so you have kind of breached that level of trust, because how would you feel if you found out that when you went into the office today, your employer authorized somebody to literally steal and copy your house key, right? That's a huge breach of trust, and especially in the United States where they're very litigious. I'd be very worried that somebody would sue. So, there's a lot of, it's both, right? Make sure you get as much in the scope of work as you can and the rules of engagement, but also just use common sense.
Okay, that's a very good question and like a very reasonable approach, I would say. Another question from the chat: how to get experience in physical penetration testing for normal penetration pen testing person can train it on the lab or CTF, but for physical pen testing, even if person
Right.
attends a training and gets some knowledge, I guess it is not really possible to test that knowledge in practice. And I guess at that point, person doesn't have enough knowledge and experience to be hired by the client and trained on the job. Before you answer, I just wanted to say that I took one of Brian's courses, Covert Access training. Did I get that right? And it's a week training hands-on, and at the end you do a pen test. So you get some experience from that training itself. So okay, but to give you the scene here.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, if you can find real, let me say it this way: if you can find anybody that you trust to give you real training, whether that's like a full-on, covert entry class, or even something as simple as go to your local locksmith and ask them, hey, do you offer any training on being a locksmith? Like, because you can get some pretty good training just doing stuff like that. But in kind of the broader sense, I often say this: the best place for physical pen testers to start is to get as much training as you can. Of course, that's always going to be helpful, but also start with auditing. Don't start with pen testing. When I run new employees, I never allow them to jump into a high-risk situation on day one. Even if we have run through a week's worth of training, I don't say, okay, you've done 5 days worth of training. Now walk with me to this highly secure government office, and we're going to go break into it, right? I wouldn't do that. What I would do instead is I would take them on a few audits first. The reason is this: when you run an audit, you are not trying to be stealthy. What you're doing instead is you are trying to just overtly, you show up in the morning at 9 a.m., you say, hi, I'm Brian, I'm here to do an audit, I would like a guest badge, please, they'll give you one, and you just walk through the facility, and you note everything that you would have taken advantage of, or you think you would have taken advantage of. So for example, if you come across an access control system and you say, you know what, I bet I could shim that door, meaning I bet I could take a piece of plastic or something and wiggle it in and slip the latch so that the door pops open. I bet I could. Try it. You're not trying to be covert, so just go and try it. If you see another door to the server room, you're like, oh, that looks like there's a gap on the bottom of that. I bet that I could slide an under door tool and grab the handle from the other side and open it. Do it, try it, see what happens. See if there's an alarm on the other side. See if anybody notices. When you're doing these audits, you're practicing and you're testing all these things. But also, and really importantly, you're getting in the habit of being able to walk through a building and say, that's a vulnerability, that's not a vulnerability. I would never try to enter through there. That's that right there, that door is how I would get in through the room. You're getting accustomed to that, and you're doing it in a stress-free environment. So one of the downsides to pen testing is that you can't really mess up, right? There's a very high bar of entry, because if you screw up, then the test is over. So let's say that your company sells a 2-week pen test. There's 5 guys on it, and you go inside the building on day 2 to get some like inside recon, and somebody walks up to you and says, hey, I don't know you. Who are you? And you just look at them, freeze, and go, fuck. Well, okay, the jig is up, right? You've blown, like something's wrong. Like you can't come back. So, yeah, like there's a lot.
They will remember you now.
Of course they will. So there's a lot of stress when you're running pen tests. And the only way to get over that stress is just to do it over and over and over again. And you can get a lot of experience, and you can lower that stress a lot by just doing auditing for the first 2-3 times, or until you feel comfortable with it. And so that's what I would recommend that you do to get your engagement. And before you've ever sold a pen test, go to the office that you work at and run an audit. Run an audit on your own office. You don't have to type up the report, because those suck. But you just walk through your building and say, okay, if I was to walk through this building and I was to look for every last possible vulnerability that I might take advantage of, let's do that. It's your office. It's your building. Why would your employer not let you do that, right? You don't break stuff, of course. Like, don't be like, well, I'm going to run an audit and throw a brick through the window to see what happens, right? No, don't do that. But, try if you're in Europe, try the tilt window bypass tools, where you take a European tilt window that's in this direction and you close it and you open it fully. Like, try that. Try under door tools. Try latch looking. See if the badges can be cloned. Take the card reader off the wall and say, like, did anybody call the physical SOC? Does anybody notice? Take a sticky note and put it on a camera or something and see if anybody notices that. See if you get a call from your G4S or whoever your security provider is. Try all of these things that you would maybe try or do on a real pen test and see, did anything happen? Does anybody care, right? Could I tailgate in? And then try to make a master list of every last thing that could potentially go wrong. So if I was to ask somebody on this call, in fact, if I was to crowdsource every person on this call and say, all right, let's all put our heads together and let's come up with every possible mistake that could be present on a web app. Every possible thing that an offensive security person could possibly take advantage of, chances are you would just rewrite the web app hacker's handbook, which is like this thick. So, okay, try to make that for physical security. What's everything that could go wrong with the door? What's everything that could go wrong with the camera? What's everything that, and make that up. And then, as you're making that list, you're going to start realizing, oh, that is a vulnerability. I didn't think that. I can deauthenticate wireless cameras, but it's still going to record me if the SD card is inside. So I should make sure to take that out. Just go through all of these things, and that's how you're going to get a lot of experience. And it doesn't cost you anything. Well, if you do trainings and other things, yes, of course. But if you just go and run, that type of thing on your own offices, then sure. Hell, even if you don't have an office, do it on your own house, right? Like, even if you don't have an office, let's say you're unemployed, let's say you're in college, whatever, just do it on your own home and see, like, all right, well, if I was going to break into my own house, how would I do it? What's vulnerable? What's secure? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm making notes myself because you're like throwing gold thoughts here, pearls of wisdom. Okay, next question from the chat is kind of like complementing the previous one that you just answered, but there's a bit more to it. One of the main questions about physical pen testing is, how do you get started in the market? So you kind of answered that one. Are there companies that hire for this type of role? What skills would be necessary to get started in the era?
Right. Okay, so there are companies that do this. My company, there's some in the US, there's some in the UK. There are companies that specialize in physical pen testing. Absolutely. The skills that you'll need it's a huge multitude of skills. So this could be things like being able to pick a lock, being able to social engineer, being able to clone a badge. Like, these are all things that you'll need, right? So I'm going to go through some of the softer skills, and it's going to sound weird, but the softer skills in physical pen testing are things like lock picking. They're things like cloning a badge. They're things like uh, uh, being able to spot an alarm, like do recon properly. As weird as it sounds, these are the soft skills. These are the skills that are like secondary, because all of these skills are things that you may or may not find yourself doing and utilizing on an engagement. So for example, if I'm running a physical pen test in downtown London, I'm probably not going to need to be in a ghillie suit sitting a mile away in a bush, monitoring stuff for like 2 days, right? Yeah, I'm not going to use that skill. It's just not going to come up. But if you're running a physical pen test, there's a 99% chance that you will always have to use skills like being able to stay calm under pressure, being able to social engineer, because you're probably going to be bumping into somebody, and then having a single useful skill. So I don't require people to be like, oh, if you want to be on my team, then you have to be the master lockpicker and the master social engineer, and you have to be able to scale a 9-story building in 2 minutes flat, right? Like, I don't, that's ridiculous, right? Like, but what you do need is you do need to have at least one skill set that you're pretty good at. So like if the client says, hey, inside the CEO's office is a safe, and your job is to put your business card inside that safe. Okay, well then somebody on my team has to be good at breaking into a safe, right? One person might be able to help them get through with the alarms and other things, or somebody might help, social engineer that, the team to get up into that room, but somebody has to pick the lock or get into the safe, however it is. So I would say that those are the types of things that you really need to focus on. So let me put it to you like this. If I asked most people to go up to a total stranger and say, I want you to walk up to a stranger and I want you to figure out what their name is, everybody here is going to be like, yeah, that's easy. No problem. Okay, well, if I said, I want you to know what their name is and where they live. Okay, still, no problem. I've done that a million times. But then if I say, I want you to find out what their name is, where they live, and the exact address. Okay, well, that's a little harder because I don't typically walk up to a stranger and say, no, I want to know the apartment number you're living in. Okay, now here's where it really gets tricky. Now find out what time they're not home.
Oh.
And so you start seeing like being able to do that is one thing, but being able to do that in a convincing way where you don't seem stressed out, you're not like dripping in sweat, your voice isn't shaking, you haven't forgotten how to talk. That's what you're going to be doing when you're inside of the building. The first time you break into a bank and you're on the stock trading floor of that bank and there's people running all over the place, you're going to be nervous. But you can't sit there and be like the deer in headlights. You have to be able to be calm and continue to do what you're going to do. That is like ultimately the first thing you have to be able to do is just stay calm under that pressure and being able to, kind of know yourself. So if you're the kind of person who, when you get stressed out, you start sweating a lot, bring an extra set of clothes in your bag. Like, whatever it is, like go into the bathroom, calm down, sit on the toilet for 5-10 minutes, calm down, change out your shirt, continue on. But being able to, be rational and calm and do those types of things, it really changes, how you're going to approach things. If I gave most people here, if I was like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to decode a key box, right? Those stupid little things you see outside of every Airbnb. I can teach you how to do that in 5 minutes. It's not hard. But if I've taught all of you how to do it, or you already know, and now I want you to do it in the outside, in the cold, in the rain, while people are walking all back and forth, suddenly your hands start shaking, you're nervous, and you can't really do it, to the same level. That's the thing that you have to fight. That's the thing that you have to be able to get over, is can you still do whatever it is you're going to do under pressure? I've personally seen a lot of people who can get through any lock in like no time flat. They're wizards. But then you put them in a high stress environment and they're idiots and they're like monkeys trying to play with lockpicks and they can't do anything because they're so stressed out. So staying calm, I know it sounds really weird, but it's a huge thing.
Yeah, actually, through whole your life, like I'm interviewing right now, so like being calm really helps me there. So yeah. Okay, next question from the chat. I think you answered the second half of the question, but I will read it anyway. So, okay, considering that more and more cybersecurity policies is being implemented, for example, DORA, etc., can we expect for the companies themselves to contact us for physical pen test, or you have to point this out to them? And the second question is, what are the must-have skills for physical pen tester? I
Right.
believe number one would be social engineering, but what else? I think you answered the second, but the
Yeah,
policy.
so I'll go in reverse order. So if you were just looking at the skills, social engineering for sure has to be one of the top ones. I'm not going to rank them as like this is definitely number one because okay, but I will say this: social engineering to some degree is going to be a part of 99% of pen tests. The only instance where it's not going to be a thing is if you are breaking into a facility that's either unmanned or it's at night when no one's there. But even if you're breaking into a facility at night, then chances are you're also going to have to go back and break in during the day. So the only instances where you're going to be breaking into a facility where there's no people is like if you're going to an offshore substation, an offshore wind farm or something where literally, a third of the time nobody's there. Or if you're going into a building like really, really late after hours. But chances are, if you're going into a building really, really late after hours, you had to social engineer and stuff to realize like, okay, well, this is why or how we're going to do that. So social engineering for sure, because you are going to do that in most instances where you're pen testing. Picking locks and kind of knowing how locks work, whether that's doors, the bypass methods for safes or any type of lock, being able to pick them or at least kind of knowing how to pick them is very useful. Alarms, knowing alarms, knowing how to detect them, knowing how to bypass them. So one thing that I tell people is this: when you are running an engagement, one of the first things you're going to have to figure out is, do you want to fight the men or do you want to fight the machines? If you break in during the day to most facilities, you're social engineering, you're fighting the men, right? You're trying to bypass people. If you break in at night, you're going to be fighting the machines, the alarms, the sensors, the cameras, all that kind of stuff. In most instances, it will be easier to break in during the day because humans are idiots, and more often than not, you can bypass them, no problem. And humans are also forgiving. If you haven't been 100% spot on with your social engineering game, but you still did it to an acceptable level where the person, kind of let you pass, okay, good for you. But when you're battling the alarms, sensors, and cameras, you cannot make a mistake. You have to be 100% spot on or you're setting off alarms. So it's very unforgiving. So most people tend to gravitate towards the social engineering route because, yeah, the alarms suck. That said, if you can do embedded recon and you can find routes, to bypass all of these sensors, then yeah, sure, do that. There was an incident in Kent, England, earlier this year where some Palestinian protest people, well, they're not protesters, but they were able to get into a weapons depot in Kent because they were able to, through recon, find that even though they had two fences with barbed wire on top, bullet resistant glass and cameras, alarms, and maglock doors and all this kind of stuff, they were able to find a route that bypassed all of that security. And so, yeah, this is one of the reasons why you do audits, because you're looking for, dead zones and routes and stuff. So the last skill that I would say is planning, is be able to plan this out, right? Know how to plan this, know how to coordinate a team. Don't be that lone wolf. Don't be that Leroy Jenkins who's just like, oh, I see an open door, I'm going in, right? Because you're probably going to mess that up. But really know how to plan this stuff out. If you've got a building and you've done recon for a week and you're like, okay, well, we see all of these possible ways in, which one of those should you do? Who should you send in? How should you do it? And most importantly, what is your escape clause? If you get into that building or you're approaching that building and something goes wrong, how do you get out of that situation without blowing your cover? So, yeah. Sorry, there was this first part to that question. I don't recall what it was.
Because of the new policies,
Right.
should we point that out to the
I would
company?
say that most entities that are going to be affected by especially CER are going to know. And if they don't know now, they will definitely know by next year because the government will let them know. So these types of things, get your compliance people. If you're working at a company right now, get your compliance people to read through NIST2, CER, DOR, et cetera, and find what sounds like convincing, scary paragraphs to be like, you do know that this is what this says, and this is why you should do this, if you want to do that. But in my experience, I've been inundated with calls and emails and stuff from companies that basically are just saying, look, we know that we're going to be affected by this, and the government is like, okay, so here's the reality right now. The CER mandates are going to come down from local governments and Brussels that say like, well, your fence has to be this high and you have to have this type of anti-intrusion method and you have to have these types of cameras. It's going to be that kind of stuff, but that hasn't come out yet. So everybody knows that, you know, if they are affected, they are going to be affected, but they don't know yet, like, okay, what do we have to do? And so as a result, it might be a great time to build up those relationships with those companies and be like, all right, you know, like, hey, let me help you so that if, you know, if February, March, or June come around next year and the government says, oh yeah, by the way, you are affected and here's a whole list of things that you have to fix and you've got 30 days to do it or you're going to lose 2% of your global GDP. Like, okay, well, yeah, have you come in now or soon and help them to fix up most of that stuff so that, you know, it might not be 100%, but at least it's close, you know, much closer than it is today.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, next question from the chat. Which role you mostly use during a physical penetration test, like posing as a job applicant, pretending to be a cleaner?
Okay, so there isn't a specific role. I do it I have a whole bunch of different roles that I've done that I will give you two examples for social engineering. But I don't have like a set, like, well, I'm always Bob the cleaner. You know, like that's not what I do. So I'll give you two stories and you can kind of extrapolate from this as you will. In one story, I have a European office where imagine a building where every floor is a different company. Okay. And there's like, I don't know, 10, 12 stories here. So you've got like 10 or 12 businesses all in the same building. And what I had done was the entrance to this particular building was an elevator. Like that was it. Like it was literally just an elevator. So one of the things that I did was I was able to do some recon where I could see in through the windows on the floor that I needed. And I kind of had a layout of like, you know, the floor plan of the building I was looking at. And I knew that there was a secretary who, and it's going to sound weird, but every time the secretary talked to somebody, she had a big, genuine smile. So through my recon, I know it sounds creepy, but I'm watching the secretary and I can see that every time she talks to somebody, she has a huge smile and the other person tends to smile back at her and all this kind of stuff. So I know that she's a very friendly, inviting person. So what I do is I dress, I shave. I mean, I'm almost 40. I'm actually 40 this year. I shave as much as I can. I dress kind of like a young person, and I take the elevator and I go to their floor, and I walk up and I said, you know, hi, I work 4 floors up from you, and it's my first day. I've only been in Europe for 5 days, and I'm so excited to be. I'm trying to pretend to be that like young naive idiot, right? And the woman's, and I was like, and my boss told me just to go around and introduce myself to everybody. And it was funny because when I said that, she kind of like muffled a laugh. Like she kind of did one of those things where it's like kind of almost cringing and kind of like looking away, like, because she knew that my boss would not have told me to go to every floor of the building and introduce myself to all these different companies. He had clearly meant, this fictitious boss, to just go through our office and introduce yourself to people. So I'm kind of, playing that persona. So I'm talking to her for 5 minutes and she's being nice to me. And she's got a little cup of coffee. And I said, man, your coffee smells amazing. And she's really friendly. So she says, well, would you like a cup of coffee? I said, oh, yeah, that would be great. I'm such a caffeine addict. I have been ever since college. I really need my caffeine fix. We've got this. And while she's pouring me coffee, I'm saying, oh, we've got this like amazing like 4,000 euro coffee machine upstairs. But wouldn't you know, it's my first day and it's broken. And they said it's not going to be fixed for a week. And she looks at me and she says, well, you know what? You work 4 floors up. I need my coffee too. So why don't you just come here in the morning and get your coffee fixed and we can chat a little bit, right? So I use this to build rapport with her. I clone her badge. I steal lanyards. I start eliciting information. So some of the information that I'm eliciting is I say things like after we've been chatting for a day or two, and I've built up some common ground with her. I've talked about her kids. I know all this information about her. We're having coffee and I look around her office and say, man, your office is so much cleaner than ours. How often do you make your employees clean up? And she looks at me kind of weird and she goes, oh, no. In Europe, we don't do that. We don't make our employees like mop the floors and stuff. We have a cleaning service. And I go, oh yeah, of course. What am I thinking? Yeah, of course you do. Like, but honestly, they have to be here every day because our office is always trashed. And I've never seen anything wrong with yours. And she looks at me and goes, oh yeah, well they come in each night, usually after we leave. Okay, great, because now I know that the cleaning staff show up in the evening times. Well, after getting a beer across the street for a few days, I've been able to map out at the cleaning staff shows up every night at 6 o'clock, and they come in through the front door where that elevator is. So it's like, okay, I know. My plan now is to break in through the rear entrance when the cleaning staff show up through the front entrance. I've stolen a lanyard. I've been there often enough that I know exactly what their ID badges look like. I know exactly how the employees dress, and I know exactly the types of things they have. So I come in dressed exactly like that. I break in through the rear door when the cleaning staff comes in through the front door, because the first thing the cleaning staff will do when they come into an office after hours is turn off all the alarms. So I use that so that they've disengaged all the alarms. I'm inside the building. I go immediately to an office. I put my computer up. I pretend to type and do stuff. And when the cleaning staff eventually come and see me, I just wave and I'm friendly and I'm sitting at a desk and I'm typing. And they just think that I'm some poor soul who's overworked. And then I use that to move through the building. And when the cleaning staff eventually says, oh, hey, will you turn off the alarms? I'm like, oh, yeah, I've got that. No problem. And so now I'm there all night alone, unsupervised, with all the alarms turned off. And so the whole point of this is that in this one engagement, I played at least two roles, right? I was the young, stupid, wide-eyed, person who worked a few floors up. And I was also the overworked employee. So it's one engagement, multiple stories. There was another instance, again, abusing the cleaning staff, where if you're wanting to clone an ID card, I'm sure that you guys know flippers and iCopies and things like this, and you probably know some long-range card readers. Well, a long-range card reader, you have to have, when you're trying to do a badge read, the badge and the reader have to be parallel, right? They have to be straight on. You can't have something that's perpendicular, because the way that the antenna works, it won't pick up any of the energy and it won't relay back. So in essence, there is another way to read badges, which is the front desk. The front desk will often have guest badges, lost badges, extra badges, like stuff sitting behind where the secretaries are. So we were breaking into a pension company, and we had figured out that you could make a real appointment with this company. And you would get a little badge that says, guest, Bob Smith, and then you could go upstairs. Basically, they just wanted you to take all of your employees and have that pension company handle all if you had like a company with a lot of employees. So while we were, figuring this out, we were doing some recon, and we figured out that yes, behind the secretary there were real employee badges. These were mostly for cleaning staff and janitors and electricians and plumbers and people like this. But those badges are awesome because they usually have full access to everything. And that was sitting, behind the desk with the secretary. So one of the things that we did was we made a real appointment with this company. I wore really thick nerd glasses, and that's going to be important in a minute. And me and a colleague showed up. I take out my cloak of invisibility, which is just my phone, because if you're acting like you're on the phone, nobody wants to bother you because they don't want to be rude. So I walk in first. I'm acting like I'm on a call. I walk over to the employees or the secretary's desk. My coworker walks straight to the secretary and says, "Hi, we're so and so and so and so from whatever company we had made up. We've got an appointment in 20 minutes." And the secretary, she looks through a little thing and she finds our guest badges and she hands them to him. Now, my colleague had given a real name, not like their literal real name, but like a realistic name. I had given the most obnoxious Indian sounding name you could possibly come up with. And I'm standing on the edge of the secretary's desk pretending to be on a phone call. Her extra employee badges are sitting between me and my colleague across the desk. My colleague looks at the badge and he goes, "Hey, can you like, they always misspell your name." Now I said, "Hang on one sec." I pretend to take off the call. I look at it. I squint really hard. I pull my glasses down a little bit, like I'm having a really hard time to see. I put my phone in my pocket. I go, "Oh, no, 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 no." And I lean over the desk and I point at the badge. And I said, "No, no, 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 no. That's not how you spell it. I know it sounds this way, but actually what you're doing, it needs to be sound this way." And I'm looking at the secretary and I say, "Oh, don't worry. Everybody does that. It's totally fine. You don't need to redo it. It's okay." Now, the whole time that I'm leaning over the desk, I have a badge reader in my pocket. that's wired up to an extender on the palm of my hand. And I'm actually reading the badge. But because I don't have a device in my hand and I didn't steal anything, it doesn't seem that odd. And even if she had noticed me, the thing that I did there was I wanted to put her on a psychological defensive footing, right? If I would have just walked up to her desk, and I said, "Hi, I'm here for an appointment. I'm so and so," and I just leaned over her desk, that's very off-putting. That's very invasive. Why are you doing that? But the secretary is supposed to be the front man for the company. The secretary is supposed to be the person who is nice and is like the big smiling front face. So having met her for 5 seconds, she already thinks that she has possibly damaged a reputation for her company. She's screwed up somehow by printing the name wrong, right? We are a potential client. We're going to potentially do business for the company, and she's already made a mistake for that relationship. So she's really timid. So she's not likely to accost me and say, "Hey, get away from my desk," right? So that whole setup right there, we were just pretending to be employees of the company, or I think we were pretending to be owners of the company. I don't remember, but yeah, it's you're going to just create cover stories based on what you think will work, based on the recon that you do. I don't really have like a set list of like, well, I'm always the delivery guy or the IT admin or something.
And always the UPS delivery guy. And
Mm.
like the next part of this question would be, how often do you get caught?
Okay. So getting caught, if the client just wants you to run a pen test and they just say, "Look, we want you to test our security and we want you to test it in as many ways as you can in the time that you have been provided." Okay. Well, then what you should do is you should tailor your test so that at the beginning of the test, you're as stealthy as possible. You're using, through your recon, you'll have a list of possible entryways, right? Like, we say like, "Oh, we saw all these possible vulnerabilities. These are the list of all the ways we think we can get inside and all the routes we think we can take from the outside to the crown jewels." We're going to start with the way we think that we can get in the best, right? The way that has maximum success, least likely to get us caught. Towards the end of the engagement, you're trying to get caught because you're trying as many stupid things as you can to see how far can we push this, because okay, it's one thing. Like, okay, let's go back a step, right? Let's go back to the pension company that I just mentioned, where we pretended to be a company. We'd spun up a LinkedIn profile. We created a fake website for this fictitious company, and we had made an appointment. And I was using a stealthy badge reader. We had gone through all this effort to clone a badge. But what happens if I had a friend who just walked up to the secretary and been like, "Oh, hey, could I ask a question to the secretary?" And I just walked in and jumped over the turnstile and kept going, right? So maybe that would work, but it's really hard to think of a really good escape clause if I had done that, gotten 5 feet, and somebody stopped me. Like, how do you go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for the bathroom"? That's a really hard sell. So on a lot of engagements, you're trying to get caught towards the end. I'll give you an example here. I was in a government office, and inside the government office, they were trying to do some type of two-factor authentication where they had a bunch of classified archives. So it was just lots and lots and lots of lockers, all with different types of classified documents. And I'm talking really classified documents. I showed, as proof of concept, I literally brought a document binder to my client contact's office, showed it to him, and he literally, his eyes got really wide and goes, slams it shut and goes, "I can't see this." But anyway, there were key boxes on every floor that were in charge of lockers on that floor for those whatever that floor of the building was doing. And at first, I took a key and I went and got a book. I took pictures, and then I put the book back, I put the key back, whatever. At the end of the test, I opened, I think, like 3 lockers on 3 different floors, and I just stole every key. So I had this shoulder bag, and it was just full of like 100 keys, and I just walked off. And apparently, the client contact told me that somebody had called the physical SOC and said, "I went to go get this archive, and every single key was missing." Well, the physical SOC had never had this happen before, so their response was a delayed, "Well, maybe they're all being used." And that was literally what they said. So it was one of those funny things. It's like, this is why you do auditing, right? Because it's like, what is your response to this weird setup? But yeah, so towards the end of most engagements, if the client does not specifically say under no circumstance can you get caught, you're trying to get caught towards the end of the engagement just to see how far can you, how much stupid stuff can you do. And by the way, that's where the game really gets fun, because that's where you get to get super creative, where you're like, I wonder if this would work, because all bets are off and you don't care if you get caught.
Uh, Great answer. And we have a lot of questions in the chat still,
Hmm.
but I want to
Yep.
ask actually one of my
Sure.
questions one now. How do you prepare for a pen test when you know you have to gain access to highly secure locations?
Lots of recon.
Okay.
Lots of recon. Okay, so I'm sure you're all familiar with the Leroy Jenkins meme. Don't be that guy or girl. Don't be that person who's like, oh, the door's open, go. Because you don't know what's on the other side of that door. You could get yourself caught, and you might not be able to get out of that door, depending on what's on the other side. So generally speaking, I usually advocate for about 50% of the engagement to be recon. So recon will be OSINT. Think of it like there was a really, I wouldn't say a bad movie, but there was a B Hollywood blockbuster like 15 years ago with Anthony Hopkins and oh god, whatever. It was a Zorro movie or something where Antonio Banderas was training to be the next Zorro. And basically what they did was they started learning how to fence. And at the very beginning, they had this really wide, ring where they were learning how to fence. And then every time he would get a little bit better, the ring would keep getting slower or smaller until eventually they're basically like shoulder to shoulder fencing. He's that good of a swordsman. When you're doing recon, that's kind of what you want to do. You want to start as far away from the target building as possible and slowly get closer and closer to it, eventually getting inside while doing recon, embedded recon. So the types of recon that you can do are OSINT, which can be done anywhere, right? You can, half a world away, you can run OSINT on something. Then you're going to do long range recon, where this is, I'm in a hotel room with a telescope, or I'm on top of a rooftop with a telescope, or whatever, or I'm in a ghillie suit in a bush. See what you can see. Then you're going to do short range recon, where you're walking around the target building. Maybe there's like a cafe or a restaurant or something that's like right across the street that you can just sit at for long periods of time and watch. And then finally, you're going to do what's called embedded recon, where if you can get inside the target building under real or false pretexts, you're going to be wearing cameras, and you're going to be using your phone as cover while you're simultaneously recording, and you're basically just going to be one walking camera, watch cameras and button cameras and all kinds of stuff. So an example of embedded recon, when I say like you can get inside the building under false or real pretext, if you were doing a bank, there's nothing illegal or eyebrow raising about somebody walking into the bank, going and getting the free coffee that they always have. So you go into any bank, they will have usually a cup of a thing of free coffee that you can just walk up, get some coffee or whatever, and then walk up to the bank teller and say, hi, I'm interested in opening an account here. Could you help me with that? There's nothing illegal or wrong with doing that. And that is a perfect way to look for, what's inside the building. Look for, cameras and alarms, and where the people wear their badges, if they wear their badges, if there's any choke points inside, like how is there security, like it's very useful for that. But basically, it's just a lot of recon. So when you're running really high security places, you need to do as much recon as possible, because I'll give you an example of. So this is probably one of the highest security places that I've done in a while. This is a government facility where they had armed guards on both inside the building and surrounding it. They had unclonable ID cards. They had biometric cameras. They had a biometric one-way turnstile that you had to go through the lobby. So basically, this is just a ton of infiltration. Like if you walk into the front of this place, you walk into the building, you have to pass by a security guard. You walk into the lobby, there is another security guard. There's a wall of that you have to scan your badge. Then you have to step into the little man trap. The door closes behind you. Then you have to put your palm, I think it was the palm or the thumb, on the biometric scanner. Then the other door will open. Like that just to get inside, right? So this is one of those things where it was like, okay, this is fairly high security, right? You've got armed guards all over the place. And what we had done was there was a kebab shop across the street, and we had sat at this kebab shop for way too long because that's another thing, by the way. This is not answering your question, but holy crap, if you're going to pretend to be eating at a kebab shop or some whatever, make sure that it doesn't hurt your belly. because there is nothing worse than having to be doing long-term surveillance and you're sitting there going, oh God, my intestines. But yeah, so anyway, so we're sitting at a kebab shop for like 4 days, like mapping this out. And one of the things that we noticed was every morning at about 6 a.m., in fact, right at 6 a.m., a security guard would come outside and he would walk around the perimeter of the building and he would open every door and then he would say something on his radio. And then he would just walk past, go to the next door, open the door, say something on his radio, and walk to the next door. And it took us a little while to figure out what he was doing. But eventually we figured out that what he was doing was at shift change, which apparently was at 6 in the morning. What he was doing was walking through and opening every single door and making sure that the physical SOC saw that the door had been opened, that the alarms and the sensors and everything were still actively working. But through this, what we figured out was there were some doors that took about 30 seconds to close. And so one of the things that we did was we followed this guy into a parking garage, and we found out that there was a stairwell in an underground parking garage that door took. It not only did it take like 30 seconds to close, but when the door finally closed, if you've ever heard a really heavy door close inside of like a stairwell or inside of a parking garage or something, it's really loud, right? Like you can hear that thing close from like 100 feet away. And what we heard was you would hear him open the door and you'd hear him release it. And as the door closed, you could hear it kind of go bang, but you never heard the latch click. And what happened was that this door didn't actually close right most of the time. And so as a result, we pretended to be going down there to, we had car keys and we dressed in suits. And we were pretending to walk down there to get into a car. He does his thing. He walks to the next door. We're chatting with each other. We look very posh. He doesn't think anything of it. It's 6 in the morning. Who robs a government office at 6 a.m., right? Dressed in suits. So he goes off and does his own thing. We walk up to the door, and through a hook, because the door hadn't closed all the way, we could actually open the door and just walk through. And here was the thing that we found out after the event. Because we had timed that so close, the physical SOC got an alert that the door had opened, but because the door had just opened, they didn't think anything of it. They were like, oh, well, the security guards are right there. Like he's literally right there. He literally opened that door like a minute ago. It's got to be fine, right? So it was one of those things that we would only have figured that out through lots and lots of recon. So when you're doing high security, the more secure the building is, the more recon you have to do. And I'll give you one more example, kind of in the opposite direction. So this is an example where I was doing a building which was super tiny. I'm talking like it's got like 10 employees in it. So that tiny, right? Like a really tiny office. And what I had to, like, we could not figure out a way to get into this building because it was situated inside of kind of a courtyardy area, which was always being trafficked by people. And there was only one way into the building. And they actually, surprisingly, had high security. But what we had discovered, we social engineered some of them at lunchtime, and because they would come outside to kind of a public area and they would get coffee and lunch and shit. And we figured this out by listening in on them and other things. That about a month prior, they had actually had a real attempted break-in. Somebody actually tried to break into the office, and the only reason the person didn't succeed was because somebody was still working in the office and they just didn't notice. So what we did was we figured out who was the insurance provider for the building, not their insurance provider, but for the building they were renting this office from. We showed up with fake cards, fake badges, and everything else. I think it was 3 of us, and we showed up and we just knocked on their door and we said, "Hi, we're from the building so and so. Here's our card. Blah blah blah. You had put in a request that you had had a physical breach or attempted physical breach a little while ago. We need to go through and take pictures of what security measures you have in place so that if something did happen, you would be insured, or we can tell you now you need to do X, Y, and Z because then you won't be insured, right?" And so they basically bought this, and we just walked through the facility taking pictures of locks and everything else. And while we're doing this, they kind of get bored, and then one of us can sneak off and go to the server room and do other stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, you can find weirdly difficult situations where it's like, this is a tiny little office with 10 people in it, but because it was like that, you can't blend in. You can't, 10 guys, everybody knows each other. You couldn't blend in and be like, "Oh, hi, I'm Bob the intern. I've been working here for 6 months." Like, no, you haven't.
But that's like
So
really big brain energy there.
Well,
And
again, you're just going to be creative. You're just going to come up with weird solutions for each problem.
yeah, I have a follow-up question about the door that you opened. Did you enter and glue the latch with the tape, or will you just check in? Will they open like for recon reasons?
So, okay, so what you're referencing there is persistence. I don't think on that particular instance I did that, but on most instances, I'm giving myself persistence in some way. And yes, if you want the easiest, stupidest way of persistence, bring duct tape with you. And once you're going into or out of a building, if you take duct tape and duct tape the plunger so that it can't actually fully extend or closed, you'd be surprised how often people do not notice. And then you can come back and the door is just unlocked.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next question from the chat. If you would be restricted to a single method of breaching, what would that be? Would it be social engineering with something like tailgating or fake employee ID, or will it be use of a lock-picking set or like some kind of a hook to pull back latches? What gives you most success?
So here's the thing is that most buildings, they have, okay, so I have been referring to this for a long time, and it's something that I came up with, so I'm just going to refer to it. I refer to this as front heavy security. Basically, it means two things. One, 99% of all the security is at the perimeter at certain choke points, the front door, the rear door, whatever. That's where all the cameras are, that's where all the alarms are. And two, any person who has gotten past that point is assumed to be authorized, because how else did you get past everything? Right? So if you're inside of a building, like let's say that there's a big office, 1,000 people in it, you assume that every person who's gotten past the access control point must be authorized to be there, because, well, everybody had to scan a badge, and how else did you get in, right? So social engineering is part of it 90% of the time. Whether you're tailgating or whether you pick a lock and then you get into the building, okay, well, now you're in the building, so social engineering has to be part of it, right? If you are the most socially awkward person, imagine, okay, for just a moment, picture in your mind the most socially awkward person, right? They are sweating to death, they're huge pit stains, they smell terrible, they cannot seem to dress themselves weird, like correctly, they don't know how to talk to people without making it uncomfortable, like really awkward. That person, even if you were the master lock picker and you picked a lock and you got inside, they're immediately going to be caught, because they're so awkward. Somebody's going to look at them and they're going to notice them, and they're going to be like, who are you and why are you here? So social engineering, if I was forced to pick one thing, it would have to be social engineering, because social engineering is almost guaranteed to be a part of every breach. But that's like, if it come to like, okay, card cloning, like, either, abusing the access control system or cloning a badge directly, okay, maybe that works like 70% of the time. 70-80% of the time that actually, that works. But once you've done that and you're inside the building, you still have to actually social engineer if they're people. So that's why I would say, if I was forced to pick one thing, it would be social engineering.
Okay, I will take like a few seconds of a break to thank
Sure.
my Patreon supporters and move my camera a bit as well.
Sure.
So
All right.
you can follow me on Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn. Here are the links. And I wanted to thank you to my Patreon supporters, King Crowley and Ghostface Killer. And yeah, I'm back asking the questions. And the next question from my list is, how do organizations react when you successfully infiltrate their premises? Have you ever had any surprises during engagement?
Um, so most of the time, so this is where it kind of comes to like showmanship. Um, ask your chat. I mean, this is going to be unfair because every person in your chat is on a computer and they could instantly look this up. But ask your chat if anybody has heard of something called Red Cell, the organization Red Cell.
So yeah, guys, you have to answer in the chat. Have you heard about this one? I have a
Yeah.
first no.
Okay. So
No.
Red Cell was something that was spun up in, I believe, the 1970s. It was either the 70s or the 80s. What this was a group of Navy SEALs who were asked to run physical pen tests on military installations. Okay, that makes sense, right? Take some of your highest trained, sneaky guys and see if they can breach military bases. That'll be good to figure out what level of our security is. Well, the problem with Red Cell was that they were a little too good at what they did. So they were able to do things like get a mock bomb on Air Force One. They kept breaching military bases. And in one instance, they not only got onto a military installation, but they were able to get onto a military installation, locate a very, very VIP, take him hostage, and get him off base and put him in a hotel room at gunpoint. All of this without getting caught. As a result, what happened was that the entire team and organization was disbanded. Basically, the senior leadership kept getting embarrassed because their bases kept getting breached by this, and they looked like idiots. So they didn't like that. And since they were in the military and they were generals, they could say, go away. The reason I told you that story is that when you give this report, there's a very high probability that you will have had success getting into the building, at least some way. When you give that report, you shouldn't approach it from the standpoint of like, ha, I'm awesome, you suck. You should approach it from a standpoint of, you guys did an amazing job. It was actually really hard getting in. We had to like really go, above and beyond to do this. But here are the things that we were able to accomplish. Here's the things that we actually did do, and here's how we can help you to actually improve. So you approach it in kind of that way, and you'll have way more positive feedback. And oftentimes, what I encourage is that when I give the actual report, I encourage my clients to just basically bring all the employees into a big conference room, and I give them a 5-10 minute spiel about who I am and what I do. And most of them think that this is just a meeting about like security. And then I walk the entire employee staff through how I broke into their building. And everybody is typically blown away, and they're like, holy crap. And they're very, impressed, and they like it, and they feel engaged in it because I'm literally breaking into their place of work. And then I usually give a spiel about things that they can do to improve, and what they should do and everything else. But that's usually how I go about it. As far as like being surprised, I have sometimes had people like security staff say things like, well, that only worked because you were lucky, or that only worked because of this or that. But it's like, but that's one of the reasons why you want to try and breach as many ways as you can. Because if you only breached one way, yeah, there's always the possibility that you could get lucky, right? Like go back to the high security facility, the government office where the parking garage door didn't fully latch properly. Yeah, maybe that only happened one time. Out of 1,000 times, maybe it only happened one time, and maybe I just happened to be there the one time that happened, right? Okay, yeah, maybe lucky, maybe he has a point. But that's why you breach multiple different times, multiple different ways, because you're like, well, okay, maybe, but then I came in this way, and I came in this way, and I came in this way, and I did this, and I did that. And it kind of diffuses that. Most of the time, the clients are very pleased and they're very happy, because you're not trying to make them look like idiots. You're not doing the red cell thing where you're trying to make them look stupid. You're trying to help them. You're trying to walk them through it. You're trying to, encourage them to do better. You're not trying to make them look like idiots. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I've come across some really surprising stuff while on an engagement, but at the report writing stage, no, not really. I haven't come across too many weird things. But yes, I have had many instances where I've seen some really surprising stuff while doing the actual engagement.
Can you elaborate?
Okay, so there was one time when there was one time where I'll give you a couple examples. There was one time when we were doing long range recon, and we wanted to get a really good picture of some employees' badges. And in front of the target building, there was a tiny little park. And at about like 7-8 o'clock in the morning, we were sitting in a hotel room with telescopes and cameras and on tripods and stuff, and like watching this. We're hoping that as employees came in, we could get pictures of their badges. And at about like 7 or 8 in the morning, two employees, a man and a woman, came and met at this park bench. And they sat down on the park bench together. They were chatting, they were kissing, they were getting intimate. And we could see that they were both employees because they both had little badges, and we got a lot of their pictures of badges. And because we had telescopes and stuff, we could see that they were both wearing wedding rings. After about like 15, 20 minutes, another employee started walking up, and the two of them fired across, like, fired away from each other like shrapnel. And we realized that they were having an affair. And so it was one of those things that's like, okay. So but that's where you kind of like have the nuance, right? So we when you're writing the report, we definitely didn't put like that picture in the report of like, oh, here's how we got this picture of this badge. This couple was sitting at this. Yeah. So we, you just, kind of use common sense. Um, there was one instance where we, how do I want to say this? We got into the CEO's office and we found that he had a little safe, and we called the client contact and we asked, can we get into the safe or try to get into the safe? And the client contact was like, yeah, sure. I mean, the board of directors gave us okay to do whatever's realistic in the test. Well, we got into the CEO's safe, and I will just say that we found some very sexually explicit things that a married man with children should not have in that safe, and we didn't know how to go from there. So it was one of those things that it was like, okay, well, the client contact told us that we could get in the safe. So this was the conundrum we had. The client contact told us that we could get in the safe. We told him we were going to try to get into the safe. We got into the safe. There's a couple things inside the safe that we shouldn't see, and we definitely can't touch or move. So we can't take a picture of the safe that's open. And if we say that we got into the safe, this guy, the CEO, is going to know what we saw. So it was a really awkward situation, right? So yeah, I've had awkward situations like that before, but yeah, it is what it is.
So then, what do? You just don't mention it in the report?
Yeah, we just didn't mention it. We just didn't mention it.
Yeah, so that's a tricky one.
Yep.
Okay, so next question from the chat. What do you think are the risks of showing your face on LinkedIn or here for the stream, for example? I mean, aren't you afraid someone would recognize you during a physical pen test?
I think that if I was to become as popular as like Joe Rogan, yes, that would be an issue. But I think that I'm still, to this day, I'm still at least unknown enough that that's not an issue. I can always go with disguises, wigs, prosthetics, and other things if I really need to. And I do use those a lot, like when you're running engagements, especially if you need to be multiple people. So if you need to be multiple people on a single engagement, learning how to use prosthetics, learning how to use break up the silhouette that you have, learning how to put wigs on and things like this, and which wigs work for your frame and your your build and everything. I do that all the time, so I'm not terribly concerned. But yes, if I was to become famous enough, then yes, I would probably start covering my face or other things. It's a valid question. It really is.
And when will you decide to wear a wig? Like, what would be the decision process there?
So oftentimes what I will do if I'm wearing wigs is it depends on the persona that I want to use. So for example, when I'm doing short range recon or even embedded recon, so let's say that I'm walking around a target building, like I'm pretending to walk a dog, or if I've got a female colleague with me and we're holding hands, pretending to be on a date, and we're walking around the building, I might dress with wigs and totally different, styles than I would normally wear. Very bright and vibrant colors, and I might even, walk with a limp if I really feel, necessary. But I'm gonna put like a blonde. Like so, right now I've got a fairly muscular, short guy with short dark hair, and a beard, right, or stubble. So I need to break all that up. So I'm going to go with like a blonde wig, and I'm going to put like a baseball cap or some type of hat on, some type of glasses. Instead of wearing black, I'm going to wear very bright and vibrant colors. And because I'm walking outside, nobody's really going to notice you. Nobody's really going to pay much attention to you. But then if one of my personas is I'm going to come into the facility and I want to look professional. Okay, well then I need to be able to look professional, which means that I can't look professional while I'm walking around outside because that persona is used up. So if I'm going to go inside the bank and do embedded recon, like let's say go back to the bank example where I walk into the building and I want to look around and ask about opening up an account, then realistically only one employee is going to see me. I mean, yes, everybody's going to see me, but only one person is going to be interacting with me, and that's going to be the bank teller. So I do need to put on it. if my plan is I'm going to come back wearing a suit, dressed really nice, with short dark hair or whatever, then that persona has to be saved for later. So I might use a wig and stuff while I'm doing outside stuff or even coming into the facility to ask about opening an account or other things, because then when I come back, I just don't look the same. So I'll give you an example. Like if you want to get really close to the target building and not have anybody look at you, dress like a homeless person. If you dress like a homeless person and you sit right in front of that building, assuming that homeless people are not, scurried off by your government, people will purposefully not make eye contact with you. If you're looking at people and you're holding up a little change jar and kind of jiggling it, they will purposefully not make eye contact as they walk past you. And yeah, you could be right there. And then if you come back like 5 hours later, dressed in a suit, tie, and clean shaven and everything else, they're not going to see that as the same person. So.
Yeah, but that's good because they feel guilty that you're homeless in a way, and then just like don't want to give you money or something. That's really smart. Okay, next question from my list is, what is the riskiest and most challenging physical pen test you've done, and what made it so difficult?
So risk comes in a couple flavors. I have done many instances where you have armed guards, and that's always a risk. That's like whenever you have people with live, ammunition and guns, that's always an issue. I've done things like offshore energy pen tests, which are their own. So offshore energy, oftentimes you're going to want to try and approach it during kind of rough weather, because then the radar, if you're doing like a substation or something, the radar that's running will have a much more difficult time of like tracking you down and being like, oh, hey, there's a little boat coming. Which again, you're running out to sea in kind of like shitty weather, it's raining and stuff. That's the whole issue. Doing engagements in certain countries where, yeah. So if you're in South America, or if you're in Southeast Asia and you're in certain parts of those countries or parts of that world, sometimes the police can be a little overzealous. So the risks are always. The other thing is that when you're scaling buildings, so there's going to be instances in your career where you might need to get over razor wire, or you might need to rappel down a building, or you might need to scale a building. So like lots of European buildings, the first floor will have no balcony, because why would they? But then every floor after that will have a balcony. And if you get something like a Yates ladder with a little hook on it, you can literally just scurry up, every balcony and go up like 10, 12, 15 stories. Absolutely, you can absolutely do that, but it's not really safe. You're very much not leaning into the safety aspect of things. By the way, like the thing that I say, I don't always follow my own advice, but the thing that I always tell my students and my teammates is, look, you're running a pen test. It's not worth your life. Don't do stupid stuff. I don't always follow that advice, but it is, I would say, good advice.
Yeah, it's a very good advice. And what should be the physical pen tester's toolbox?
Do you mean like gear?
Yeah, I think gear. It's from the chat. I think gear.
Okay. So gear-wise, it's first off, it's really going to come down to what are you good at, right? If you suck at lockpicking, don't bring lockpicks. There's no point. When you go on an engagement, you cannot bring a hiking backpack full of stuff. So you're going to have all this stuff that you might want to bring with you on the engagement, because like, oh man, what if I get, up 2 or 3 floors and I didn't bring, the J-turn tool, or what I didn't bring the double door tool, or like there's a ton of stuff you're going to want to bring with you, but you can't bring like a literal like hiking backpack full of crap. So first off, only bring the stuff you know and you're good at using, right? If you suck at lockpicks, don't even bother. But if just in general, for me, what I would do, your favorite brand of lockpicks. If you're not good at lockpicking, then an electric pick gun. Multi-pick makes Kronos and Atlas, and an electric pick gun is basically just a big toothbrush with a piece of steel on it. When it comes to lock picking, if you are good at lock picking and you know what you're doing, make sure that you have lock picks for each type of lock. So you've got your pen tumbler locks, you've got your wafer locks, you've got you've got tubular locks, you've got a whole bunch of different styles. So you might see tubular locks on safes as the mechanical override. You might see wafer locks on cabinets and drawers and shit. So make sure you bring all that with you. Bring a underdoor tool with you, usually folded up. And the underdoor tool is like it's like a double-edged sword, man, because you roll that thing up and you tie it to itself and then you stick it in your bag. Be careful when you open that bag, because that thing is like fired out at me, and I mean that could seriously take out an eye or something. Bring some pieces of plastic for shimming doors. Bring your favorite style of RFID cloning, badge reading cloning, whether that's long range, relays, flippers, iCopies, Proxmarks, whatever it is that you personally like. Bring disguises. You might never know if once you get inside you need to like change persona. Just thinking. Bring if you're going to be dealing with like European windows, bring like a window bypass tool. So this would be a suction cup and then something that reaches over to the handle, that'll grab the handle in the up position, close the window, pull the string so that the handle goes down, and then use a suction cup to pull the window up so it'll open fully. If you're going to be dealing with that, I mean, bring like a, sorry?
How about the get out of the jail letter?
Yeah, of course. Like the get out of, so the golden rule is never even approach the building without your get out of jail card, because don't. That's a really stupid idea. But there's other tools too, like I think ProxGrind, I think they are, like makes this stupid little thing that kind of looks like alien art, which you can approach a card reader and it'll tell you if it's low or high frequency, which can be very helpful. I use a lot of O-lights, so these little guys. It's a very, very tiny little light, but it's USB powered, and I apologize for your stream. It's going to be a little bright for a second, but it will go from this to this,
Ooh.
and it's just the tiniest light. So I use those a lot because they don't take up any space. They're not much weight. Cameras, you always want to have cameras with you, whether it's, GoPros or your phone or button cams or watch cameras. One thing about watch cameras, if you're going to use a watch camera, do not use it while you're on the move, because you don't realize how much your arms swing when you're moving. And if you're trying to use a watch camera while you're moving through a building, you're going to make everybody on your team seasick when they're trying to watch the footage. So bring a laptop with you, because you never know. Like once you get inside the building, it might be advantageous of you to just pop the laptop open and sit there for an hour. Sure, why not? Always bring your phone with you. One thing on pen tests that kind of trips people up is go slow, right? Once you've gotten into the building, don't rush things. You need to act natural. And a lot of times, if you think about okay, well, what would a normal person do? I was on an engagement in Germany recently at a logistics center, and this is a huge shipping place. And I managed to get into the building. And the first thing that I do, I find myself inside of a cafeteria at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning. There's a bunch of employees piling in. The first thing I do, because I'm already in a cafeteria, is I get breakfast. I literally just get breakfast and I sit down and I'm just sitting in the window and I'm just watching and I'm chatting on my phone and I'm literally chatting with my team, I'm doing this, and I'm surfing Reddit and doing other crap. And it's just slow down, because there's something called the friendship formula, which or the trust formula, or however you want to phrase it. Basically, it says that friendship or trust is built on a sum of a whole bunch of things. It's like proximity and frequency, duration, intensity. Basically, it goes like this. If you have a haunt that you go to, a gym, a cafe, a place that you go to that isn't work, and you go there often, then chances are you trust the people in that establishment. If it's like your gym or a cafe that you go to, you would trust the people that you see there often more than you would trust a total stranger, even if you've never talked to them. And it's because if we're in proximity to other human beings often, we kind of recognize that, well, if this person was, going to rob me or hurt me, they would have, right? I've seen their behavior and they seem normal, they seem nice. So I've kind of gotten a lay of the land, they seem okay. So if you're inside of a building and you just slow down and you're that guy was eating breakfast here earlier today, or I saw him at the coffee machine, you suddenly become a backdrop figure, and they don't see you as somebody who's running through the building and acting really nervous and stuff. So slow down if you can. Take your time.
Okay, I see a question in the chat, but I actually wanted to ask that one because in the class you had a tool that you called a big scary magnet, and I was
Oh
wondering,
yeah.
do you take it with you, and when do you take it with you?
Okay, so when you're doing like alarm bypassing, so the little contact alarms that you see on windows and doors, basically the way that they work is it's something it's operating on a 1940s technology called a reed switch. A reed switch is basically just two pieces of metal that are really, really close to each other, like the width of a human hair, like even less than the width of a human hair. And in the presence of a magnetic field, they touch. And when the magnetic field is not around, they don't touch. And it's basically the way that a magnet, when it's inside the presence of a magnetic field, it will turn a circuit on or off, right? So that's basically what it's doing. So all these alarms are based on that concept of you have a sensor, um, basically an alarm, and then you have a magnet. And the sensor has a reed switch in it. So when you put the things together, it's saying no problem. And then when you pull this apart, that's when an alert, an alarm, or something goes off. So one of the things that you can do is you can use a bar magnet or a Gauss meter or something. You can run it around a door or window on your side, figure out if the bar magnet suddenly goes and it's like following one place in the door. You're like, okay, there's probably a magnet right there, which means there's probably an alarm. So then you'll have a big scary magnet, which is basically just a neodymium magnet. It's like this big with a plunger sticking out of the top. You'll turn it on, put it where that thing is, and then open the door, and you'll hopefully be able to bypass that magnet. Now, before you do all that, I do recommend trying to see through the door if you can. If there's a mail slot, or if you can get a borescope underneath the door, or if there's a window that you can see through to see, like, is there actually an alarm there? Things like that. But again, recon, right? So yeah, carrying a big scary magnet is definitely something you could consider doing. But if you are breaking in during the day, it's usually not an issue, because if you're breaking in during the day, then depending on the security level of the building, then it's usually not an issue because most alarms and things are turned off.
Yeah.
But there will probably be areas where there are extra security, server rooms, archive rooms, etc.,
Okay.
which you might need it.
Thank you for
Yeah,
the answer. I wanted to jump into social engineering for a moment, and
sure.
I have questions that two of them are kind of connected with each other. What is the role of social engineering in physical security, and why is it such an effective attack vector? And can you give an example of a particularly successful social engineering attack you performed during a job?
Yeah. Okay. So social engineering is, first off, it's a necessity, because social engineering is what we do in our daily lives. It's literally what we do every single day. It's how we interact with people. We've all seen people who just, you look at them and you know that they're confident. We look at people and we know that they're timid and nervous. You can see all of that. You can project these things. If you want to come across confident, there are ways to do that. If you want to come across shy, introverted, etc., you can do that. If you want to dominate conversations, you can. So social engineering works because you're dealing with human beings, and human beings, human beings work based on how they interact with other people. So I will give you an example of something that I do all the time when I'm inside the building. So one trick that I pride myself on is eliciting. Eliciting is a type of social engineering where you extract specific useful information from a person without them realizing that you're doing it. So the entire point of elicitation is, you have knowledge that I want, but I can't just come out and say, hey, could you tell me what the password is for your social media accounts? Like, yeah, nobody's going to tell you that, right? Like, nobody would. But there are ways that you can extract that information over time. And so one of the questions that you deal with is, how do you know, once you're inside of a building, which employee to approach to try to social engineer them? So one thing that often happens is, once you've broken into a building, there's a very good chance you're not going to have a layout of the building. Like, imagine if your client literally owns a building, not a floor, but like a building that's maybe 6 stories tall. And the client has said, well, we want you to get to the server room, and we want you to get to the CEO's office, and we want you to do all these things, right? Well, you're inside the building. You have no idea where any of this stuff is. So asking an employee like, oh, hey, could you tell me where the server room is? That'd be useful. oh, hey, do you have access? Do I have access? Like, do most employees have access to this or that? Are there any alarms here or there? Getting answers to those questions is extremely useful, but obviously you can't just walk up to somebody and say like, oh, hey, could you tell me where the CEO's desk is, please? Because that might come across weird. So one of the tricks that I do to spot soft targets is to use nonverbal friendship signals. So what this is a series of things that you can do without saying a word to a person. It is have a big genuine smile. So we can see differences between like a social smile, or kind of like I don't know if I'm close enough to the thing, but if a social smile is just kind of like something like this, right? It's a fake smile. A genuine smile is where you actually start to see laugh lines, and you kind of have that whole like, right? So a big genuine smile, usually closing of the eyes or looking away or looking down, and tilting of the neck, exposing the neck to them. Now, we've all seen this. It sounds kind of weird when I'm saying it, but if I was to have a drink or something with me and I did something like this and I go, we've all seen that, right? We've seen some derivative of that. We've seen some derivative where somebody, gives you a salute or a hand wave. They're like, hey, why is that universal? I've done this job all over the world in many, many countries. That is almost universal outside of places like Russia where they don't smile ever. But I apologize for any Russians, but seriously, you guys don't smile. But it's the reason why that's interesting and why it's effective at spotting people is that imagine for a moment that you were sitting in front of like a lion or a wolf or something that actually wanted to murder you. The last thing that you're going to do is do this, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be, you're not going to close your eyes and expose your neck unless you're like, all right, get it over with, right? So when a human being does that to another human being, when they give them a big genuine smile, they close their eyes, they tilt the neck, they're exposing themselves. They're saying to you, well, what I'm saying to them when I do that is I'm saying, I'm a friendly person and I don't see you as a threat to me. I'm closing my eyes, I'm making myself vulnerable, and I'm big wave, etc. So what you're looking for as you move through the building is somebody who does it back to you. Because when you've done that to a person, if I'm walking through the building and I always carry like a cup of coffee or something with me because it kind of helps to sell it. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll pretend to be on the phone, I'll be walking with my little cup of coffee, and I'll see an employee that I think might be a good target. And I'll just I'll act like I look at them, I see them for the first time, and go, oh. And what I'm doing is I'm watching to see if they give that back to me. If they just kind of give me like a little fake hi, or just kind of like walk on fast, like, okay, just move on, just go, no problem, no foul. But if that person gives me all of those friendship signals back to me, what they're telling me is they too are a friendly person who doesn't see me as a threat. And as a result, that's exactly the kind of person that I want to go up and start talking to, right? They're friendly. They don't see me as any type of a threat. Yeah, great. So we're going to start having a conversation. So I do this all the time, and it is very successful. Now, when it comes to social engineering, I mean, yeah, I've already given you a bunch of stories where it was very useful. Tell me if that was enough of an answer. Otherwise, I'll think of some other stuff.
Yeah, I think for me it's good. So, and I have like a question because
Sure.
we already are going to hours here, and but still have a lot of questions, and there are like some questions in the
Sure.
chat.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Do you mind like going another hour like from
No,
this?
it's fine. I'm probably gonna have to run and pee real fast, but yeah, sure, we can keep going.
Yeah, just tell me when that is, and so I will change
We'll
the
do.
screen for something else. And
We'll
then,
do.
okay, next question is, let's say I already have the basic skills. I can stay calm and handle stressful situations, and already have some auditing experience. How could I get my first job as a physical pen tester?
Okay. So first things first, one of the reasons why I say do an audit instead of a pen test is because the person who asked this question, they probably don't have a team of people with them who all have experience. Okay. So most of you guys, even if you are good, like let's say that you can stay calm under pressure and you're pretty good at social engineering and you're good at lock picking and you're ready to go. Okay, but you need a team. It can't just be you. right? Don't let it be you, because if it's just one person, you're going to be pulling 16 to 18-hour days, because you need to be there before the employees show up in the morning. You need to be there throughout the day to watch their movement patterns and other things. You need to be there after they leave to see what time they leave. You need to see what time cleaning staff and other people show up. Like, you're going to be there all day long. And so you like, make sure you have a team with you. But if you do auditing, then you can absolutely do that single-handedly. And by doing auditing first, you build up that relationship with that client. If you go up to a client and you say, hey, look, I'd like to help you with your physical security. I would like to walk through your building and just take note of, any type of vulnerabilities you might have to protect you. Help get your security, make sure that it's up to a very high standard so that bad guys can't do, bad things. If you can sell that and you can do that audit for that client, chances are you can come back and do it for them again. But if you do an audit for them, this is usually, okay, so security comes in basically three components. You have compliance. Compliance is, do you have all the tools that you need? And in physical security, that's like, do you have the locks? Do you have the access control systems? Do you have the cameras? Do you have the alarms? You have to have all the things in place, right? Defense is saying, the blue team side of things is saying, let's test how you're actually using those tools that you have in place, right? So you've got alarms, you've got cameras, but is anybody actually watching, or is it just kind of like a car alarm going off where everybody's like, shut up? And then the offensive team is testing it. The offensive team is like, okay, well, you've got all your compliance stuff and you've got somebody who's monitoring stuff. Let's see if they're actually doing a good job. Let's see if they can defend themselves when I steal all the keys from the key box, or if they just blow it off, right? So it's one of those things that to have good security, you have to have all of these components. And oftentimes that's not the case. Oftentimes you don't have all of those components. So when you're first getting into physical security, I highly recommend you to do auditing first. I know it's not as glamorous. I know it's not as fun, but you will build rapport with that client. Your skills will increase. And this is most important, that you can grab 2 or 3 people who have no or little experience and do an audit with them. And as such, they now get experience. So like, oh, that's how an underdoor tool works, or oh, that's how you shim a door, or oh, that's how you bypass a lock, or a window, or whatever else. Because you get to try all that when you're doing auditing. When you're doing auditing, you might look at a door and say, I bet I could shim that door. Okay, try it. Try shimming the door, right? See how it works. So it's one of those things that your team gets to practice and learn and gain experience just with the physical security space, but also kind of as working as a team. So it's one of those things that I highly encourage that. But if you disagree and you're like, nope, screw it, I want to go straight in, I want to be a one-man show, or maybe you have a team of people that you want to do it, then you just need to have relationships with clients and you need to have a good sales pitch. And you just need to be able to be a convincing person to say, this is why you should start investing, to the client. This is why you should start investing in physical security, and and then have your pitch, whatever the pitch is.
Yeah, great answer, actually.
Thanks.
Okay, my question from my list would be: are there any low-tech techniques that still work surprisingly well in the modern physical security breaches?
Shimming doors. Shimming doors works all the time. I don't have something with me here, but basically and I apologize to anybody who already knows this. This is very elementary stuff, but when you use a door, you've got the frame of the door and you have the door itself, and there'll be a handle or a knob or something, and when you turn that, you'll see this little plunger going in and out. Well, that plunger should have a tiny little component to it called dead latch. And basically what happens is that the plunger, the bigger part, should go into, the strike plate, but basically into the frame. And the little dead latch should get stuck, right? It should be basically depressed. It should be all the way in. So the plunger is all the way out. The dead latch is all the way, depressed. And as a result, what that stops is it stops the Hollywood credit card trick, where you take a credit card or a piece of plastic and you run it through the door, and you basically push that latch back into the door, and you can pull the door open. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing, unless you have a dead latch, unless you have a deadbolt, that's the only thing keeping that door shut, is that one piece of metal that's sticking in from the door into the frame. So if you can move that piece of metal, you can just pull the door. You would be astonished how often that is not the case. I encourage all of your audience to Google something called a CRAT tool, and it's spelled SEARAT, and it's made by a firefighter in Seattle, and it's like the Seattle Firefighter Rapid Entry Tool. I don't remember what it stands for, but basically it's watch their demos, watch their promotional video. And what you will see is firefighters and law enforcement just shimming and slipping latch after latch after latch. If you're in the United States, look the next time you go downtown or you're walking past doors, look for a door that has a small metal plate. So you'll have like where the handle or where the handle or the knob of the door is. Right, the separator between the door and the frame, look for a metal plate that's about the size of my hand or maybe my whole forearm that's stuck right there. That's usually an indicator that that's a shimmable door. And if you have something that can reach over that piece of metal and pull, then chances are you can just pop that door open or push, depending on the orientation of the door. But yeah, so it's shimming. Shimming works all the time. And oftentimes it's just a cheap piece of crappy plastic. So yeah, anybody who's ever run like the covert entry classes, like yeah, you'll shim doors a lot. And
It's like it's surprisingly that you can do it in seconds, actually. So it's a lot. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so the next question is a bit connected to the one that I asked. What is the most unconventional or surprising vulnerability that you have exploited during a physical pen test? Is there anything coming to your mind immediately?
Oh, unconventional. That's an interesting one. So I would say, as weird as it sounds, the most unconventional thing is what's referred to as asset acquisition. So this is something with physical pen testing that people don't think about. So I mentioned previously how the cleaning staff are like the people who hold the keys to the kingdom, right? Usually the cleaning staff are third party. They're not actually employees of the company often. It doesn't matter if they are, but they're usually the least paid and they have the highest level of access. Now, if you're a cleaner, then you don't care about security. You don't care about the company and their profit margins and everything. You just want to clean the toilets, mop the floors, and get the hell out, right? It's a thankless job. It's a dirty job. It's a laborious job, and it sucks. So you're not typically concerned with like the real company itself. You just want to clean the toilets and get away. But imagine for a moment that you are working for a major company. Let's say that you are working for a company that has like, I don't know, 20,000 employees. It's a global entity. And one day you're in the hallway of your office and the CEO, the top guy, the big wig himself, bumps into you. And he looks you up and down and says, "You look like you're working really hard. I'm on my way to go get a coffee. Could I bring you one when I come back?" Well, that guy has no reason to be that nice to you, right? He is God of that company. Whatever he says goes. His importance and pay to the company is here, and yours is here. So, I mean, there's no real reason for him to be that nice, but it will probably build rapport. It will probably impress upon you like, wow, he didn't have to do that. He could have literally just walked past me, without even looking at me. But man, he's literally personally going to go get me a coffee. So it's a very easy way to build rapport with somebody. If I'm inside of a building and I happen to cross the cleaners, or if I know who the cleaners are and they hang out, they get food or whatever, nearby, or because you'd be surprised how often cleaners will show up early or stay late, go to a restaurant, go to a cafe, go somewhere like around the building that you can also go to. If you build rapport with these people, they will very often let you into places. They will let you into places. They will tell you things they shouldn't. I'll give you an example of this. I breached a building and we were having trouble getting into the server room because the server room had its own security setup and it was actually quite robust. It was basically a bank vault that they had turned into a server room. I'm not kidding. Like the actual door was like this thick. It was huge. It was super heavy, which made a lot of the things that we were trying to do really hard. So, but we had built rapport with the cleaning staff because what we were able to do was we were able to break into the building and we got persistence into the building. So we kept showing up to the building and we kept working late. And as a result, the cleaners spoke Turkish. One of my colleagues spoke Turkish. So they just started building up a rapport over like 3 or 4 days. And we started mapping out the cleaning route that the cleaner went to because we knew that the cleaner went into the server room. So we just mapped out for like 2 or 3 days. We just mapped out, okay, first they clean this floor, then they clean this floor, then they do this, then they do this, then they get to the then they get to the vault. And so for like, I don't know, like 3 days long, we were just there after hours and we were chatting with the cleaning staff. And we were, we would be there working on our laptops. And I was literally writing the report, by the way, like literally after hours, like writing the report for this pen test. And we would talk to the cleaners and we'd see them and like we got to know them and we started, shooting the shit. And we started finding commonalities. I don't have any kids, but he was the cleaner. He was like, oh, I've got 2 kids. I've got 2 boys. It's like, I've got 2 boys. Like, oh, it's this. My boys are like 12 years old. My boys are like 10. Like this, So we started having these commonalities and talking to them and being jovial. And one of the things that we did was on the last day, we purposefully looked really stressed. And so we had built up all this rapport with him, and he comes in and he as soon as he sees us, he's like, oh, hey. And we almost ignore him. And we're just like, working on stuff. And we just kind of go, hey. And we're just, we're almost being rude. And what happens is that he kind of was like, sorry, man, we're just working. We got a deadline. And he's like, oh, yeah. So he goes about his thing. When we know that he's getting to the point where he's going to the vault, that's when we find him. And we bring him some coffee or water or something, some drink. We brought him something. We're like, hey, man, I'm really sorry. We're on a deadline. We were just trying to get through it, blah, blah. But what we had done was we knew that the next place he was going to was the vault. And that's when we started the conversation. But we had built up rapport with him for like 3 days before that. So he didn't that's not what robbers do, right? This is not what you would expect like criminals to do. So he didn't see us as a threat. So when he went into the vault to clean it, we walked in with him and just kept chatting and doing this stuff. And because he was cleaning and we were talking to him and there was 2 of us in there, it was very easy for us to complete the thing that the client asked us to do while we were bullshitting with him. And it's like, but I would say that that's very unconventional. That type of exploit is not something that people think about. But your clients should definitely be asked the question of who holds the keys to your kingdom, right? Because usually the client is going to say, well, the employees, the IT admins, the board of directors, these people. But oftentimes it's the lowest level people, like the cleaners, the janitors, the cooks, the people who have access to your building, unfiltered, usually when all the real employees are gone. It's like those people are usually the ones who have it. Let me say it this way. If I asked, I'm just going to assume that everybody here has a job and they're working for, let's just suppose that you're working for a global company, whatever. If I said, hey, look, I work for the FSB or the GRU, and we're willing to give you $1 million if you take this USB stick and you walk it into your server room and plug it in. You'll get $1 million, not rubles, $1 million, and we'll give you a mansion in Moscow. But you got to go do that. Well, 99% of you are probably going to go, absolutely not. But what about the cleaner? What about that Turkish cleaner who's making $5 an hour? Do you think that she would take $1 million in a mansion? It's like, see, this is the thing. It's like, you do this, most people say, oh, absolutely not, because you have a lot to lose. But if you're at the absolute bottom of the totem pole, then suddenly that actually is far more enticing. So, I mean, imagine if I said to you, hey, you're 19 years old, you're about to go to college, but you know what? If you do this one thing for me, you can bypass all of that and you can skip straight to retirement. You can have a house, you can have $10 million, you can have amazing cars, you skip the entire work part of the career and you just go straight to retirement at 19. But I need you to do this one thing for me. Well, okay, you might say no, but would everybody say no? Because all I need as like an actual bad person is one person with access to say, sure.
Yeah, that's actually a fair point. A good way to look at it. Okay, my next question is, and if you by any chance wanted to take a break, just tell me, let me know.
I'll take one more question, then I'll take a short break.
Okay, what are some of the most significant security improvements you've seen companies make after physical pen test?
Okay, so this is going to sound weird, but so no amount of cameras, alarms, fences, bulletproof glass, etc., is going to help you if your employees are idiots. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's go back to that government office that I mentioned, where you had armed guards unclonable cards, biometric scanners, one-way man traps, or one-person man traps. It doesn't matter if you have all that if your employees suck. If I walk into that building and I say, "Oh, sorry, I left my ID badge upstairs," and the guard goes, "Oh, okay, well let me just open the door for you," right? All of that technology was useless if your employees suck. You can improve. Now, I've been saying this for like 10 years, so I encourage you to take this. Just hopefully you'll credit me with the idea. But the thing that will improve your security for your client during daylight hours by like 80% is not what most people think. It is a form of employee awareness. And no, it is not the employee awareness that you're thinking of. Because most times when I say we're going to do security, employee awareness, the only thing that you actually learn or do is how can you clandestinely surf your phone, right? Because nobody listens, nobody pays attention. It's some bullshit about like don't reuse passwords and don't make it like don't make your password password. Like, okay, yeah, it's that. What this is it's a form of employee awareness and engagement that comes in that has two components. One, you have to give every employee in writing something that says under no circumstance will the employee get in trouble if they stop somebody who looks suspicious or they don't know, as long as it's done in a professional manner. Okay, you cannot dog tackle somebody in the hallway, but if you approach somebody who looks suspicious or you don't know or isn't wearing an ID badge and you say, "Sorry, I don't know you, we have to go to security," or "I have to call security." Okay, under no circumstance will you get in trouble, right? Because a lot of employees are legitimately concerned. Oh, well, I don't know that person. Maybe they're a VIP. Maybe they're from another company. Maybe they're from another department. I don't want to get in trouble. It's not my job. I don't care, right? That's usually the attitude you're going to get. The second part is you have to actually entice them to care about security. Now, if I told every person on this call, let's suppose for a minute that we were all sitting in the same room, and I said, just so you're aware, somewhere in this building, I have hidden a piece of garbage. And if you bring me my piece of garbage, one of you is walking home tonight with $1 million. I would guarantee that nobody would be listening to this podcast stream. They would all be going and picking up trash. Even though it's not your job, you would still be frantically pulling out garbage from everywhere and bringing it back to me, right? Because I've incentivized you with something you really want, which is a lot of money. Now, companies can't do that. They can't literally say, "Well, we'll give you $1 million if you stop bad people." So what you do instead is you encourage them with the next best thing that they want that the company can afford, and that's time. So you say once a quarter or once a month or however often the company wants to do this, you have somebody who's not an actual employee or somebody the employees don't know walk through the building, and the employee who stops them in a professional way and says, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know you, we have to go to security or I have to call security," they get a week of paid vacation. Now, seriously, think about it. Like everybody wants a week of paid vacation, right? And if you did this, say 4 times, if the company does this 4 times a year, but the company doesn't tell you when it is, then I will tell you from telling companies to adopt this idea and then going back in and trying to pen test that company that actually did it, every single employee is a pain in my ass because like it's not every employee, but most employees, you will be walking through the facility and every other second somebody will walk up to you and says, "I don't know you. We have to go to security." Because you have turned it into a game and you're incentivizing the employees with what they really want. So you basically turned most employees into little roving surveillance cameras, and you've actually made them care. And you've done it by incentivizing them with something they actually want. And as long as you do that regularly, like you can't do it once a year. If you do it once a year, nobody's going to care. You have to do it regularly enough so that the employees think, "Oh, maybe today's the day," right? So whether that's once a week, or not once a week, whether that's like once a month or once a quarter or whatever, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to give them a week's of paid vacation. You give them like a couple of days. But having a couple of days of paid vacation is something every single employee wants to have. So yeah, do that. And that alone, it costs the company nothing, and it increases your security by like 80% during daylight hours. Obviously, it does nothing during nighttime, but during daytime, it's very effective.
Okay, so I guess that's now it's my moment to go into commercial, I guess.
Yep, I'll be right back. I'm gonna take a short break.
Sure. So, guys, this is just to cover my screen for a moment and my Patreon supporters and the links you can follow here. And so, actually, I wanted to. Yeah. Okay. Wanted to change into this screen and to talk about the giveaway that I will do it the giveaway at the end of the stream. So after we run out of questions, but like the gist is here that I have one more voucher for elicitation toolbox course to give, and two for physical audit certification training. I'm gathering everyone that like the name of everyone that asks a question, and I will do I will like do the spinning wheel at the end, and we will first I will pick one person for the elicitation toolbox course, and that is on October 12th and 13th. So it's like I think it's next week, next weekend. So if you are going to be selected for this training and you cannot actually go and take use of the voucher, just tell me straight away, resign of like your price, and then I will still use that name to pick you for the physical audit certification training. And so what do you have to do? I think it was already in the chat. Reshare the post. That was yeah. I can actually share it again in the chat here. So reshare this post to help me spread the news. But actually, we are in the stream, so maybe someone will still have use of it and like see it last moment, and then like the page for Covert Access Team because I just want them to be more recognizable, and then come to the stream and leave a question. I think every one of you already did that, and so yeah, that's this. And now Brian is back here, so
Break.
yeah, and yeah, and he's not muted anymore, so needed to check for that. Okay, and another question from the chat: when do you do recon? Do you use cameras like glasses or something covered to be able to review it later? I think you answered partially, but yeah, there you go.
Yes. So take as many pictures and as many videos as you possibly can because it will help your team out. One, you might not catch everything. So if you have a static camera, let's say for a minute that you have say you've got a hotel room and you've got a telescope with a camera set up to it, just record that so that that's running and then you can go do something else so that you can come back and you can review the footage. But even if you're watching something, I mean, if you're watching a building for like 6 or 7 hours, you're gonna drift off. You're gonna turn your head while you get some water. You might miss stuff, right? So having a video of the event helps a lot. Also, you can when you're inside the building, especially when you're inside the building and you're doing embedded recon, make sure to take videos or pictures of stuff because it's easier to show your team a video than it is to try and mentally draw out like, well, I think that there was something over here, because some other members of your team might be like, oh, that's a camera, and you might have missed it, right? So it's very, very good to take as many videos and pictures as you can so that you guys can review it later.
Thank you for answering that question, and maybe this time a question from my list. Okay, so for companies looking to improve their physical security, what are the top 3 steps they should take immediately?
Well, the very first thing that I would always recommend any client to do is first to do an audit, because that, regardless as to where your security is, like your physical security, it could be really good, it could be really crap. Like you don't necessarily know where it is, and the client probably doesn't either. But once you've done an audit, you've pointed out all the stupid stuff, whether there's a lot or a little. You pointed out all the stuff that they should be improving. So that's the first step. I always encourage them to do an audit first. An audit, without loss of generality, is usually about 1 week for about 1 to 2 guys, and that includes the report. Now, of course, that scales, right? Like if you're doing like a hospital complex, okay, yeah, like a month, because a complex for a hospital is like 4 floors and like 5 buildings and like 5,000 entrances. It's like, yeah, okay, then there's a lot. But yeah, roughly speaking, about 1 to 2 guys, 1 week. So once you've done an audit, The next thing that you need to do is encourage them to have you come back in like 5, 6 months or however long it's going to take them to fix whatever issues you have, and then run a pen test. Because now what you're doing is, okay, you put your security up to a high level. Now let's see if you're actually using it correctly. Let's actually do a reality check. And then lastly, encourage, like, get the employees engaged. Find a way to get the employees engaged in something, whether that's, so some companies literally don't have a budget. Some companies, like, literally they just don't, they're really concerned with physical security, but they literally just don't have the money for it. So one of the things that I'll do is I will go to that company, we'll get all the employees together, and I will give them a speech like I would give at like B-sides or any type of conference. And then at the end of it, then we will pitch the whole, like, I'll have some corporate person come up, and that's where they will pitch the idea of, like, we're going to have somebody walk through the building, so many times per year. And if you catch the person, you get like a week of paid vacation, blah, blah, blah. Find a way to get the employees engaged, because the employees are your best weapon. So, getting them to care about security and get engaged and incentivize them in the correct ways, that's what's actually going to matter. So those are the three things that I would do basically.
Okay, and you mentioned B-sides, and I wanted to ask about that like a bit like at the end of the stream, but actually now it's a good time. So I did
Sure.
meet you at B-sides Krakow,
Mhm.
and so I wanted to ask, can you tell us what were you doing there, and how did you like the event, and how did you like Krakow?
Yeah. So I've been, this last year I have been making the rounds with B-sides. I think that I've done 5 or 6. But so yeah, Krakow's a really fun city. It's very nice. It's I was giving a speech on physical security and basically just a lot of misconceptions of basically vulnerabilities that people don't realize are vulnerable. Um, for like snapping Euro cylinder locks in half to give yourself persistence into buildings and stuff, and things like that. But yeah, I enjoy pretty much most places that I go to. There are some places that I avoid these days, but if I can. But no, I mean, Krakow is a lot of fun. I've been in and out of Poland like a lot lately. I don't know why, but I think I've been in Poland like 5 weeks of the last 2 months. But yeah, yeah. By the way, I mean, nothing against Krakow, but I was in Gdansk recently, and I've got to say that I prefer Gdansk to Krakow. But
Why,
it
why,
is what it is.
why is that?
It's a very pretty city. It's very, very pretty. It's very, very historic. There's lots of, kind of like castle-y architecture and stuff, like really nice cathedrals, very pretty medieval style streets and all kinds of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah,
encourage anyone to go.
actually, personally, I like both of them, and I'm in
Mhm.
like a bit of conundrum because I wanted to move to one of them, and I cannot decide which one to choose. So actually, I love them both. So it was really interesting that you liked it as well. Okay,
Good.
so I'll follow up. Next question from the chat. What I
Mhm.
often find hard, what do you put in the pen test report when do you do physical pen test? How
Yep.
detailed do you write it down? How do you use the things like timestamps
Mhm.
or the times when you observe the building? Do you put pictures of the door you breached? Do you write down everything you noticed? Okay, that's a long question.
Yeah. So when I do whether it's a cyber pen test or a physical pen test, the report is going to be tailored based on the severity of something. Um, so it's a little tricky when it comes to physical pen testing, because if you say like, oh, you're running a Euro cylinder lock that I could drill. I replaced your lock. Nobody noticed. It gave me persistence. I was in and out of your building, blah, blah, blah. But that drilling of the lock, right? So you've got a Euro cylinder lock that's vulnerable to drilling and breaking. That in and of itself is not a critical vulnerability. But you could string it together with a series of vulnerabilities. Like, let's say, okay, so I drill the lock, I open the door, I replace the lock, nobody notices, that's fine. But then I come in during daylight hours, your employees are wearing badges outside. I took a picture of it from a car that allowed me to print out an ID badge that looked exactly like yours with my face and name on it. That allowed me inside the building. I then made it to the archive room, and because I had a fake badge, nobody questioned when I went into the archive room. And then I picked the lock and stole some documents because you're running like $5 wafer locks on the archives. So it's like, okay, Each of those things independently is not a catastrophic vulnerability, but stringing them together absolutely is. So usually when I write reports, the way that I do it is at the end of the report, I make a list of every vulnerability that I came encountering. So in this particular example, you had a drillable Euro cylinder lock, employees wearing the badges outside, employees not questioning me if I have a fake badge, and the cheap wafer lock inside the archive room. So you had 4 vulnerabilities. What I would do is at the end of the report, I just put each of those and I just say, here's the vulnerability, here's pictures of it, here's in the building where it was, here's how you fix it. But then what I do is I have like an attack narrative. And I said, I used this vulnerability with this vulnerability and this one to do this and go from the outside. And that's kind of how I do it. But I look at reports as something that I'm going to give to the client, but I make sure that when I actually present them with the report, we do a very long, sometimes like an hour or two, where I go through the entire thing of what I did. I walk them through, here's what I did, here's how I did it, here's why it worked, here's how you can fix it, et cetera, so that every person from the technical guy on the call to the C-suite, they all understand, the vulnerabilities and why they happen the way they did and how to fix them and why they're severe or why they're not important, et cetera. And I allow them to ask questions and we go back and forth. That to me is the most important part of it, to really make sure that the client understands. Because if you just tell the client, oh, you had a lock that I could break, okay, like nobody, like they don't understand why is that a problem, right? You have to really help walk them through it. So that's how I usually do it. I put all the findings at the very end, and then I basically reference them as like attack narratives throughout the thing. And then when I do the actual pen test, what I do is I try to break into the building as many ways as I can in the time that I have allotted. So, maybe you come up with like 4 ways that you could break into a building, start off with the best idea that's least likely to get you caught, and then go to the stupidest idea, assuming that it's okay if you get caught. And then just you do that. Now, that said, another thing that I add in the report is if I have found things that I think are vulnerable, but I didn't either have time to go after them or it would have been too risky to go after them, I definitely include those in the report. And I just say, for these reasons, we didn't go after X, Y, and Z. So like if the client says, under no circumstance can you get caught, and we found that there is a way that we could probably get in, but there's a camera or an alarm or a sensor in a spot that we can't manipulate, and we're like, we can get in this other way and there's no risk to us, or we could try to get in through this way and there's high risk to us. Let's not do that. Okay, so fine. So, but you definitely want to include it in the report. Anything that you see, anything that you notice. But that said, one thing to be aware of is that when you're running a pen test, you are not going to be able to test everything. You're just not. You're not going to have the time. You're not going to have time to test everything. You just won't, right? Like if you find a basement door that you can go into, there's no alarms, and it's a shitty lock that you can just pick in 5 seconds. Okay. And the client says, under no circumstance are you to get caught. And that door leads to a stairwell that goes right up to the CEO's office or whatever. Why would you not use that, right? Why would you try to go through the front door, which might have vulnerabilities, but that's where all the security is? Like, okay, well, maybe the front door, you could get past it, but why would you try it if the most important thing is not to get caught, right? So that when you're running pen tests under certain constraints, you may literally purposefully not test certain things. So you have to include that in the report of like, okay, well, for these reasons, we didn't test X, Y, and Z, but we did notice them.
Thank you for answering. And
Sure.
the question from my list would be, how do you balance ethical boundaries when using
Right.
social engineering? What guidelines do you follow to ensure you're not crossing the line?
Okay, so social engineering. If all you're doing is tailgating, no big deal. And by the way, for anybody who disagrees that tailgating is a form of social engineering, try doing it naked. I guarantee you they're going to turn around and go away. Yeah, it's definitely a form of social engineering. But that said, the aspects of social engineering. So I mentioned earlier about spotting soft targets, right? Like spotting people when you're trying to elicit information from them, spotting people who give you feedback of like, oh, I'm a very friendly person, I don't see you as a threat. Go after those people, right? Well, there's other kinds of people that you can absolutely go after. And these are any person who you can recognize their needs. So if you can look at a person and you can say, I know what you need in this moment. So for example, let's suppose that you're at an airport and the plane has been delayed by half an hour, and the little woman at who's at the ticket counter or whatever, like you've got like 50 people who are surrounding her, all yelling at her, despite the fact that she clearly has no control over the fact that the plane was delayed, right? You see 50 people coming up to her and say, my flight's delayed, I'm going to miss my connection flight, blah, blah, blah. Like, I will never fly with this flight again. Like they're screaming at them, they're yelling, they're pissed off. In that moment, what that person needs is empathy and probably somebody to complain to. So if you walk up to that person, that ticket counting woman in that moment, and you just say, man, I don't think that I'd be able to stay calm if I was, going through what you're going through right now. If you give her that empathy in that moment, I've done this many times before. Chances are they will just look at you and they'll just immediately open up and they'll just say, oh my God, this is like, I just want to scream. It's so hard to like stay calm or something. And then you just say like, I don't think I could do it. I don't know how you're staying calm under this, but I applaud the fact that you are. Doing that type of thing, by the way, has gotten me a lot of upgrades to first class flights. Just letting you know, being human like that. Now that said, in that moment, you knew what that person needed, right? They needed a little empathy. They needed a little, somebody to complain and be a sounding board to. But there's other types of people. There's other types of emotions that you can see on people, like they wear them on their sleeves. Like one of the biggest paradoxes when you want to approach somebody is the grumpy guy. I literally wrote an entire blog about the grumpy guy. But the grumpy guy is a paradox because when we see somebody who's pissed off, we usually purposefully try to avoid them. But think about it, when you see somebody who's pissed off, you actually immediately know what they need to do. They need to vent. They're pissed off for a reason. They need to complain. They need to shout. They need to get that frustration out. And if you can provide them an outlet for that, chances are you will really have made a friend. But here's the catch. One, that's potentially dangerous because some people will actually just go to violence. But two, if you start that conversation with them, and I'm going to tell you this from 18 years experience eliciting information. Once you start eliciting information from somebody, especially if that person is emotionally involved, do not be surprised if that person not only doesn't shut up and they want to talk for hours, but also they will start revealing to you really, really, really sensitive stuff. Because if that grumpy guy is pissed off because his wife was cheating on him or some really bad personal thing, and they start just opening up to you about that, you're there for a pen test, and this employee is telling you about, his wife's infidelity, how are you going to put that in the report? And what is that employee going to think if he realizes that you're a pen tester who's using him for information? So on a pen test, I tend to just err on the side of caution, and I encourage my team to do the same, that if you think that this could go in a certain way, don't do it in the first place. But if it does, like even if you are eliciting information from somebody or you're social engineering somebody and it starts to go in a direction that you don't want it to go in, this is where you have your escape clause. One of the things that I tell people is, look, you don't have to be a master social engineer. You don't have to be somebody who can convince somebody to do anything. But you do have to be a master at escape clauses. The escape clause is if you are in a situation you don't want to be in, how do you get out while simultaneously making the other person happy that you left? Okay. And I'm not saying like you walk up to somebody, slap them and run away. Oh, now I'm happy that person is gone. But I mean like you have left that situation and they are happy with how it ended. It's not awkward. It's not anything else. So the escape clause could be something as simple as a scripted phone call. There are apps on your phone where you can set a call that will literally call your phone in like 5 minutes. What I usually do is I have a friend. I play with the buddy system. I will tell my colleague who's with me. So let's say we're in the hallway of a building. I'm going to approach somebody. And what I do is I tell my colleague that if you see me scratch the back of my head, then call me. Okay. And I will use that as, oh shit, sorry. Are you okay? Sorry, I've got to take this, right? That's my escape clause. Okay. So, and they'll be standing down the hallway or whatever. So something as simple as that. The escape clause could be that. It could be like your buddy walking up to you and say, "Hey man, we've got that meeting in 5 minutes." And like, "Oh crap, sorry, I lost track of time. Let's, you know." The escape clause could be, "My wife has gone into labor." Like it could be whatever you want it to be, but it's how are you getting out of that situation without making it awkward for that other person, that they are happy with how things left. You need to be really good at that, because if you can't do that well, then you are playing the pen testing game on hard mode, where you get one shot, and if any person approaches you, yep, you're done, you're cooked, because you can't get out of that situation, right? If you suck at human interaction, and if any employee walks up to you and asks like, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing? Like you freeze up. You can't like if you can't handle that situation, then you are playing the pen testing game on a mode where you have one life as a video game. Like that's it. You no extra tries, no do-overs. That's it. So be very good at that, if nothing else.
Great advice. Okay, I have a next question from the chat. How did your first physical engagement go?
Ah, wow, the first one. Okay, so that's not really fair of a question, because the first one I ever did, I was the cyber nerd who was with a whole bunch of guys from the military who were really, really good at it. And so I kind of just hung back, let them do all the hard shit, and I just planted the bugs and like did all the technical stuff. So I don't think I mean, so that was just really fun. It was really exciting because I was with like 6 guys who really knew what they were doing. They had a lot of experience. And they kind of just like, I was like, the idiot savant who's like, well, I'm really smart at what I'm doing, but I could never social engineer. I suck at pen testing. I sucked at lock picking at the time. Like they just kind of carried me through the building. Like, okay, plant bug here, do this here. I was like, doing stuff for them. But the first time that I was kind of running a team, um, I don't think it was the first time that I was running a team, but it was one of the first times that I was running a team. We had found everything went really well, except the very first part. We had this was one of those instances where it was an office on like the 10th floor of the building, right? So we wanted to get in after hours, and honestly, I can't remember why. I can't remember why we decided to go in after hours, but we were like, we're going to get in after hours. We realized that we could go up an emergency fire escape and get onto the roof. And since I'm an avid rock climber, I was like, I'll just rappel down, because for 4 days we saw that this one window was just open in that office. And it was like, all right, I'll just rappel down and go in the window. I was like, fine. It's like, I don't know, like 7 o'clock at night, something like that. And we're like, we can't see into the building because, we're on the ground floor and we can't see 10 floors up. But we're like, it's like 7 p.m., man. I mean, nobody's going to be there. So I get up to the top, I'm going to rappel down, and then my team is going to go up the fire escape, and like I'm just going to let them in, or something like that. Maybe it was a window, I don't remember. But anyway, I'm rappelling down, and I get to the window, and I remember thinking, before I jump and go in, I should look. And I have the brake hand on, and I kind of lean over, and I'm looking through the window, and there's a guy with his back to me, like 10 feet away on his computer. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, fuck, what do I do? It's like I did not think that there was going to be a person here, and I'm sitting there like nervous, like what the fuck do I do? I probably sat there for like half an hour thinking about what to do. Like, do I climb back up? Because now I'm kind of panicking. Like, am I gonna make noise? Because I didn't think he could hear me. I didn't think anyone was there. So I was like bounding down the side of the building, and I'm like looking through, and he's got his back toward me. He's got headphones on. He's doing shit, and I'm like, fuck. And then we start thinking like maybe he's not the only one here. And so yeah, so about half an hour goes by, and I kind of come back down, and I look through the window again. He's gone. And then I had one of my teammates who was down on the ground floor. I said, "This is what this guy is wearing. Tell me if he leaves." And then we got confirmation that he actually walked out of the building. So then we followed through with that. And then after that, everything went fine. But that was stupid. That was definitely something that I would encourage you not to do, because that was dumb. But yeah, it is what it is.
But yeah, you learned from the experience, so I wouldn't say
Yep.
that's a mistake. So it's a learning opportunity.
Well,
And
the funny thing about that is that we revisited that same building about 2 years later, and we realized, there was actually a parking garage like quite a ways away. But had we have gone to that parking garage and gone to the very top floor, we could have used a telescope to see into the building. It's one of those things that, learning experience. But yeah, this is why you do all the recon, right? Do all the recon.
Yeah, prepare.
Yep.
Okay, next question from the chat. When it comes for government assessments, are they doing a lot of background check on you and your company and ask for specific certification?
They don't ask for certifications because with the physical space, there really aren't too many. So, I mean, my company offers certifications. There's a few other companies that offer certifications, but there's really not, like in the cyber world, you got like CISP and OSCP and like these things that everybody knows. But in the physical space, there's really not. So they're not asking for certifications per se, but what they are asking for is background checks, like security clearances. So most governments, some companies, they will ask for either a U.S. security clearance, a NATO security clearance, or a regional security clearance. So a regional security clearance is usually easier to get. It's basically just the country that you live in. They run a background check on you. They do a few checks here and there, and they make sure that you don't have any criminal history and things. It's usually not that invasive. A NATO security clearance is kind of one step up from that. It's a little bit more invasive depending on how high up you go. And then a US security clearance is a microscope up your butt, and they will check everything. It's like, we're going to go find your Boy Scout leader from 20 years ago and talk to him and see what kind of a person you were. It's like, but yeah, so most of what you do, if you're doing corporate, you don't need anything. Maybe you'll need like a regional background or a regional security clearance. But most government entities, they want some form of like a regional security clearance or a NATO security clearance, or if you're working in the U.S., they might say, yeah, you need a U.S. security clearance or something. But yeah, but as far as certifications go, I've never once in 18 years had somebody say, well, you need this certification to do this job. I've never had that happen, not in the physical security space, anyways.
Okay, next question from my list is, with advancement in technology have like facial recognition and AI-based security systems, how are you adapting your strategies?
Yeah. Okay, so I have a very useless master's degree, which I'm very proud of it because it was from Georgia Tech. It's from artificial intelligence, and it's something that I never use. So that's why I say it's a useless degree. But one of the things that I specialized in was artificial intelligence when it comes to vision, like computer vision. And you can screw with AI in a lot of ways, but one of the easiest ways to screw with it is, so the way that AI maps who you are is the most important part of your facial data is what's called the T of the face. The T of the face is like, imagine a big T around the eyes, down the nose, and just past the mouth. This is the T of the face. It is the most important part of the face, and without it, an AI, unless maybe there are government AIs out there that can do better than what I know of, but Georgia Tech is I think it's like number 3 in the world for computer science, so it's a pretty good school, right? But anyway, so the T of the face is very, very important for AI to be able to pick out who you are. If you block certain gradients within the face, it literally cannot figure out who you are. And one of the easiest gradients to screw with is the bridge of the nose. So if you take anything, a piece of paper, anything, and you put it like right here, like right between the eyebrows and right at the bridge of the nose, a lot of AI cannot tell who you are anymore, because they are looking for gradients of eyebrow to not eyebrow, eyebrow to eye. They're looking for these differences of dark tone, light tone. That's often what they're doing. So yeah, now AI facial mapping, that's a whole different thing, but most cameras are not using facial mapping, where you're actually like, a million little pixels, like trying to figure out exactly where every point of your face is. Some cameras are specific to figure out what you're saying. So there are some technologies out there which will map your face to be able to, like, basically this is how you read lips. So this is used a lot in espionage, where you'll get a telescope and you'll watch somebody in an office at a huge distance, and you can actually see them talk, but you can't hear them, right? They're like 500 meters away or something. But as long as you have a really good telescope or something, and you can see their mouth moving, this AI will actually be able to tell you like what they're saying, which is
Wow.
good. So, but that's not what you're dealing with most security cameras.
Yeah, but that's really, really impressive. Okay.
Well, I
Uh,
didn't invent it, but yes, it is very it's a very impressive and scary piece of technology.
yeah. Okay. So another question from the chat: have client ever got angry because of physical engagement?
I've never had the client get angry. I have had security, like facility managers or security guards or people like that, get mad for the same reason why, like when I'm running a cyber pen test, sometimes you'll get like a really disgruntled SOC member, because you're basically showing that they suck at their job, right? Like that's basically like, some people will take it that way. Some people will take the whole like, oh, if I show that I broke into your building, then that means that your facility manager sucks, or your security guards aren't doing their job, or these types of things. But you can often diffuse those situations through social engineering. So the better social engineer you are, the better negotiator you are, the better you are at that type of thing. So I've had people kind of be disgruntled about, like, you snuck past them, or you stole the keys, from their locker or something, and you used it to gain access to this or that, and they're kind of pissed off that you were able to do it. They're more just embarrassed, and they're just kind of lashing out frustration. If you can diffuse the situation and you can turn it so that you make them like not look like a jerk, then yeah, it's usually not a big deal.
Okay. So next question from the chat is usually how many? Oh wait, I covered part of the question. Uh, Usually how many people do you need in that engagement?
Okay, so for a physical engagement, I usually run two. Well, I usually run. Ideally, it's going to be 4 to 6. So 4 to 6 is usually the team size that I recommend, but you can scale this depending on the size of the building, the experience level of the teams. I have run engagements solo before. I do not encourage it, because it really, really, really sucks to do that. You're going to be working like 16 to 18-hour days. If you need buddies, or if you need teammates to do certain engagement, types of things, you can't. If you fail, like if you got burned, well, you're kind of screwed, because you can't come back if you get burned. So it's one of those things that I would encourage. I would encourage you to do 4 to 6 people. But the downside to using 4 to 6 is that most clients are not going to be able to afford it. Most clients are going to have a huge problem with saying 4 to 6 pen testers for two weeks, right? That's a big chunk of change. What you are more likely to get is 2 to 3. What you are more likely to get the approval for the client is 2 to 3. And that's okay, as long as every person on the team knows what they're doing and none of them are like really junior, right? If you're really a junior person, then try to get some auditing to get that person kind of up to speed. Try to send them to some education or training, courses or something, to kind of get them up to speed on stuff. But yeah, that would be how I'd answer that question.
Okay, and the one from my list, what advice would you give to individuals who want to prevent themselves from being targets of social engineering attacks? I hope that question makes sense.
Yes. Okay, so if you're talking about general social engineering, like if you're talking like everything from phishing campaigns to, vishing and all this kind of stuff, like that's a huge topic. I'm going to focus on like elicitation and like in-person social engineering, because that's kind of what we've been chatting about. And if that's not what you meant, let me know. So one of the best ways to not be elicited is to learn elicitation. So basically what that means is, like, it's very easy to elicit information from somebody who doesn't know anything about elicitation, because you don't know the techniques, you don't know the methods that they will use. But if you know what elicitation is, then you will instantly be able to spot what the person is doing, you will see that technique and you'll be like, oh, I see what you're doing. So learn about elicitation. One of the best ways to not get elicited and not to be a victim of social engineering is to learn about it. Learn the techniques, learn the tactics, like go through that. The second way to do this is kind of like the hard stop way, is only answer questions in yes, no, and I don't know. If you answer every single question in yes, no, and I don't know, it's basically impossible for me to get information out of you. Because if I want to learn about the security layout of the building, and and you will only answer me in yes, no, and I don't know, it's really hard to get info. It's if I start talking to you and I'm like, oh yeah, so if you're wearing like a sports jersey or something, and I'm like, oh hey, you like that sports jersey too, to like build up commonality, and you just go yes. It becomes really obvious really quick that this is not going to work, and I'm going to move on to somebody else. But yeah, those would honestly be the two best tactics. It would be learning about elicitation and then answering questions in yes, no, and I don't know, because it's basically just a hard stop. Now it sucks for social genuine social engagement, because if you meet somebody like out at a club or a bar or something and you want to actually have a conversation with this person and you're like, well, I don't want you to elicit me, so I'm just going to answer questions in yes, no, and I don't know. It's like, well, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
But
Okay, next question from the chat. Did you ever
sure.
have a customer complaint justify the time you used? Let's say you had a week of time and therefore, for example, 7 paid days, but the actual break-in was 1 day. Do you sometimes have to justify the other 6 days of wasted times, quotation marks there? And I ask that you said before that you try to break in several ways. So then, like the
Right.
follow-up question would be, okay, let's imagine that's security, super high security, and you only found one way to break in.
Right. Right. So, okay. So one of the things that I do is I always tell the client ahead of time, like how we go about this. Like first I tell them the generalities. I say, we are going to spend about 50% of the time running recon so that we avoid getting caught. We see all the vulnerabilities that you have currently in the facility, et cetera. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time trying to, go through the execution phase. If we come across very, very secure buildings or places that we just can't get in, then the recon phase gets longer and the execution time gets shorter. But that makes sense, because if you're having a really high level of security, then you're probably not going to have 5, 6, 7 ways of getting into the building, right? You're probably only going to have like 2 or 3, maybe even one. So you tell the client all of this ahead of time, and then I encourage the client to basically get daily reports if they are interested in it, where we just basically kind of call them up and we're like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how we've been successful with this. We're monitoring that, and just kind of let them know what's going on as it's going on, so that at the end of the engagement there isn't any miscommunication. So that at the beginning of the engagement, if you said, well, we're going to spend 50% of the time doing recon unless it's really secure or we have problems getting in which case, maybe we'll do 80% of the time doing recon. And then the end of the engagement comes in, you've only broken in 2 times or 2 different ways on the last day. And they're like, what the hell were you doing? Like, yeah, so they're just aware as you go along of like what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it's going, et cetera. Because also they might have, as weird as it sounds, they might give you like ideas or things that you wouldn't have thought of, that it's not really cheating, but oftentimes clients kind of want to help. So yeah, it is what it is. But I encourage you to keep the client in the loop as you go along. I've never had an instance that I can think of. Now, 18 years is a long time, but there's no instance that I can think of offhand where I had a client get really pissed off because I spent a lot of time doing recon, as long as I did it professionally and as long as I, did what they wanted me to do, which usually. So
Thank you for the answer. And that
sure,
would be the last question from the chat, because
great,
we are running out of time here slowly.
sure,
And I have few from my list, but they're like really easy to answer, I think, short questions. Okay,
sure.
have you done any penetration testing for, I need to like what the acronym means, industrial control systems,
Yes.
and how it differs from a normal pen test?
Yeah, so ICS systems, I've done many pen tests for industrial control systems or critical infrastructure, things like this. The way that the chief difference is the threat and the risk, both to your team and to whatever it is that they're controlling. So industrial control centers, whether it's like a substation, whether it's a wind farm, whether like whatever, these are places where you can legitimately get hurt. So substations, for instance, if you jump the fence on a substation, there is literally a chance that there could be an arc of electricity that could kill you. So you have to know how to dress, you have to know the risks, you have to know what you're doing. Most of the time, when you're dealing with industrial control centers, if you are going to run a physical pen test on that, it is the most hand-holdy that you will get with the client. You are basically going to be tethered to the client via a phone, and you're going to tell them, I'm doing this, this is what I'm doing, this is the way that I'm going in, this is the door that I'm going to go through, etc. Because if you go through the wrong door, you might hurt yourself, you might set off a sprinkler alarm system or something. Like there's a lot of things that could go wrong with these types of tests. So you have to be very, very close with the client to make sure you don't do it. Also, in most corporations, they will want you to see like add like a cyber component, like, hey, could you plant a bug or a device or a listening thing to like, show how bad it could be? Okay, yeah, fine. In ICS systems, you don't do any of that. You like at worst, literally at worst, you're going to either take a picture of yourself in a room or you're going to leave like a post-it note or something. Like you're not doing anything else. You're not plugging in anything. You're not touching anything. You're not unplugging anything. You're doing none of that. It's almost always just, I take a picture of myself in a place waving at the camera to show that, hey, yeah, this is where I am, right? And it makes sense of why they want to do that, right? Because you're dealing with extremely production environments. Like if you're, breaking into an energy plant that's controlling the grid for a city or something, the power for a city. It's like, yeah, they don't want you plugging shit in. They don't want you, they don't even want you running Nmap on the network. So yeah, that's usually how that differs.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And
Sure.
I'm going to wrap up a bit here. So, one of the last questions, what is the most satisfying part of your job as a physical pen tester and social engineer?
Okay, it's weird. It's going to sound really weird, but the thing that I have come to like the most is what makes me feel the most like James Bond, which is not what you think. That is after you have finished an engagement. You've been on the job for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. You've broken into the building, God knows how many times. You've had lots of stressful days. You've had lots of long nights, and you're at the airport getting a drink, flying out. That's my favorite part. My favorite part is being at the airport after an engagement, getting a coffee or something at a restaurant, knowing you never got caught. You went into a country, you broke into their central bank, you got access to the mainframe, you did something really high end, and now you're at the airport flying away. And not one time did anyone catch on to what you did. That to me is my favorite part.
Thank you for answering that. Yeah, I didn't expect that, but it makes sense. And so, okay, the next question is, I was asking before about hacker movie, but I decided to make the question like more broader because maybe you
Okay.
don't want to choose a movie. So, favorite hacker movie, game, or book that is part of the hacker culture?
Hmm. Um, wow. As weird as I don't know if this really counts, but probably going to be something. Maybe I'm not thinking of anything good off the top of my head. Probably The Matrix. I mean, if you count that as a hacker movie, I mean, there's elements to it, but something like that. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my favorite movies, so I would answer the same. So I see you have been working out, like you are very fit. So what would be your favorite exercise?
I don't really have a favorite exercise. I just like to exercise. One of the things that I like to do is I tend to break up my day. If I'm going to be working from home or something, I'll get up in the morning and I'll work out for like an hour, and then I'll go work for 2 or 3 hours, and then I'll go work out for some time, and I just back and forth. So I do a lot of boxing, I do a lot of jujitsu, I do a lot of weight training and calisthenics and things like that. But yeah, I don't really have a favorite, I suppose.
Okay, and favorite food or dish?
Um, Probably sushi. I think one of the best meals I've ever had was a friend of mine in the Air Force who was getting married, and he made the mistake of having his wedding reception at a all-you-could-eat sushi bar, and I was invited, and I'm pretty sure I ate more food in that one night than I ate like in the next month. But yeah, that was amazing.
I will probably do the same because I like sushi too, and I will probably roll out of the building afterwards.
Pretty much, yep.
Okay, so yeah, I don't have one more question from the chat. I will allow it,
Sure.
I guess. Favorite book for social engineering?
Um, oh, um, so there's a book, I think it's by Robin Dreeke. Hang on a second. I actually probably have this. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure I get the title right. There we go. So there's a few books that I highly recommend. I don't know if I could pick like a favorite. Um, there's one by Chris Voss. It's not necessarily a social engineering. It's more of a negotiator kind of book, but it's really, really good at negotiation. And it's the book is titled, or the book author is Chris Voss, and its titled is Never Split the Difference. Um, Lena Cisco is another
Oh,
excellent elicitation person and negotiator. She was a Marine interrogator down in Guantanamo for a long time. Her book is called Honest Answers. It's also a really good book. Um, there is a Jack Schaefer. I will say this. I think Jack Schaefer is probably my favorite social engineer. His book, The Truth Detector, is very, very good. If I was going to start with a social engineering or elicitation book, I would probably start with that book. He also has another book called The Like Switch, which is also a very good book, but The Truth Detector is probably my favorite of his. Um, Joe Navarro. Joe Navarro is a very, very good professional at reading people, like being able to like see body language analysis. His book is called, well, maybe it's not his only book, but his book is What Everybody is Saying. Everybody not being one word, as in like every body. So I'll end it there. I have lots of books, but that's a pretty good starting point for your audience to go
yeah.
through. Um,
Okay, so I don't have any more questions. Yeah, it's 3 hours, so I think yeah, it's time to let you go. And
sure.
I wanted to ask if you want to take part if in the giveaway, but you don't have to, and we can end it here.
Oh, I'll leave that for you guys.
Okay. So on
But
my side, thank you for joining and like for stepping in. I had a different plan, but the person couldn't attend. So thank you for emergency
yeah, of
showing
course.
up here and like yeah, being answering the questions and for your stories. It's always amazing to listen to you, and people in the chat say the same thing actually, and yeah, we are all impressed. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'll let you guys go, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, see you guys.